Chapter 147. Everyone present was shocked. It should be said that they were terrified. Especially those soldiers whose eyes were filled with terror at this moment, because they didn't even know how those people had died. Even Ling Han and the others wore solemn expressions. This was really a little terrifying. Dark Realm Dao soldiers. Yi Xian looked towards Lu Banzwang. Lu Banzwang was silent for a moment and then shook his head. Wait for daybreak. At night they will use their cultivation technique to merge with the darkness, and it will be difficult to discover. Daybreak. Yi Xian frowned. If they waited for daybreak, wouldn't countless soldiers of the Jiang country die when the sky turned dark? At this moment, screams suddenly came from all over the military camp. Seeing this, Jiang Jiu's expression gradually became a little twisted. At this moment Yi Xian was suddenly stunned, because a piece of paper suddenly floated out from the entrance of the second level of the prison tower. On the paper there was only a pair of eyes. Human eyes. Yi Xian was stunned, and the next moment he suddenly came to a realization. Sword eyes. He was the sword eyes. At this thought he hurriedly calmed down. Soon he could clearly sense everything around him. Suddenly Yi Xian suddenly turned around and then opened his eyes. Two flashes of sword light shot out. Several meters away there was suddenly an explosion beside a soldier, and then a blurry ghostly figure was sent flying backward. The next moment, a flying sword suddenly flashed past the battlefield. On the ground in the distance, there was suddenly a lot of blood, and gradually, a man in black appeared in everyone's sight. Yi Xian waved his right hand lightly, and the spirit-elegant sword flew in front of him, and the surroundings suddenly fell silent. The soldiers present all looked on alert, cold sweat on their foreheads. Sometimes death wasn't scary, but the process of waiting for death was scary. At this moment Yi Xian said softly, "They're all gone." Hearing this, the soldiers present instantly breathed a sigh of relief. However, Yi Xian, Jiang Jiu and the others' expressions were still grave. Yi Xian glanced at Lu Banzwang. "Be careful." After saying this he looked at Jiang Jiu. "Let's talk inside." Jiang Jiu nodded slightly and entered the tent with Yi Xian. Jiang Jiu sat down and said in a low voice, "The morale of the army is unstable." Yi Xian nodded. "I know, I will think of a way to solve it." Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, "These assassins are not something that you and your soldiers can deal with. I will think of a way to deal with them. What you need to do now is to stabilize the morale of the troops and protect yourself. The real target of those killers just now was you." Jiang Jiu's death was undoubtedly a fatal blow to the entire state of Jiang. Jiang Jiu nodded. "I will be careful. However, their main target should still be you and your friends. You guys should be the ones who must be careful." Yi Xian replied, "I know, I will go and discuss with them. You should immediately inform the imperial capital and ask the emperor to send someone here." With that he turned around and left the tent. Yi Xian returned to his tent. He sat cross-legged on the ground and entered the world prison pagoda. At this moment a piece of paper floated out from the entrance. On it was a small paw print. Yi Xian was speechless. He was speechless. Yi Xian was speechless. He was really speechless. Most of the time he really could not understand what the god on the second floor meant. It's just a paw print. Who could understand it? Another piece of paper floated out. There was an additional palm on the paper. This palm was not the cat claw from before but a human palm. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "God, can't you speak?" Boom. At this moment the second floor suddenly shook violently. A powerful force directly sent Yi Xian flying. Bang. Yi Xian crashed onto the ground. At this moment he felt as though his entire body was about to fall apart. Yi Xian buried his head on the ground and wailed in his heart. This was 2F** king bullying. At this moment another piece of paper floated out. On the paper was a human's mouth. There was also an unknown mouth. In between the human's mouth and this unknown mouth, there was a small symbol. Behind the unknown mouth there was a symbol. What the F*** did this mean? Yi Xian did not want to live anymore. At this moment the second floor suddenly shook violently. Yi Xian quickly got up. Don't. Let's talk nicely. I'll study it." After saying that he quickly picked up the paper to study it. After a while his face suddenly darkened. Because he roughly understood the meaning of this piece of paper. The guy on the second floor was asking him why he did not speak its language. Simply put, the guy on the second floor should not be able to speak the human language. Not from this world. Zhou Xian was puzzled. Another piece of paper floated out. On the paper there was a claw overlapping with a human palm. Overlapping. Zhou Xian frowned and thought for a long time. At this moment the second floor suddenly shook again. Zhou Xian's face changed and he quickly said, I understand. It stopped on the second floor. Zhou Xian said cautiously, You mean you want to merge with me? Or you want to use my body to come out? At this moment another piece of paper floated out. On the paper there was a square root symbol. Zhou Xian, possession. This word came to Zhou Xian's mind. Zhou Xian quickly shook his head. Oh no. Possession? It was scary just thinking about it. In the past he had heard that some powerful experts would seize control of the body. If the guy on the second floor wanted to do that, it definitely wouldn't work. Another piece of paper floated out. Just like this, Zhou Xian communicated with the guy on the second floor. After about half an hour, Zhou Xian was so tired that he sat on the ground. It was really too tiring. Especially if he answered incorrectly, the god on the second floor would make a move. It was too much of a bully. He tried to resist, but he really couldn't beat him. Finally, Zhou Xian glanced at the entrance to the second floor. How about this? According to our previous agreement, you can come out twice in a month. You can come out on your own once and I can ask to come out the other time. Is that okay? After a while, a piece of paper floated out from the second floor. On the paper was a small square root symbol. Seeing this, Zhou Xian immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't want to agree, but he had no choice. This guy on the second floor was not a kind person. If he didn't agree, he didn't know what this guy would do. He really couldn't afford to offend him now. Zhou Xian left the prison pagoda and went to Lu Banzwang's tent. Lu Banzwang was eating flatbread and had a green onion in her left hand. Zhou Xian sat in front of Lu Banzwang. Are there any assassin organizations like the Dark World in the Central Plains? Lu Banzwang paused. After a long time she nodded. Yes. Zhou Xian quickly asked, Can you invite them? Lu Banzwang shook her head. No. Why? Zhou Xian didn't understand. Lu Banzwang glanced at Zhou Xian and said, We can't invite them. Moreover, those assassins are insatiably greedy. It's easy to invite them in but difficult to send them away. We can only deal with this matter ourselves. Zhou Xian fell silent. He wasn't afraid of those assassins. With the sword eye, those assassins didn't dare to approach him. He also discovered that as long as those assassins showed themselves, their battle prowess wasn't very strong. The strength of these assassins lay in their unpredictability. Most importantly, these assassins weren't targeting him, but the soldiers of the Jiang nation. This was the most hurtful thing. In fact, it wasn't just these soldiers. Ling Han and the others were also in danger. Right now, Ling Han and the others were all gathered together. They didn't dare to separate because it was really too dangerous. At this moment, a voice traveled over from outside the Drunken Immortal Inn. Young friend, please come out for a gathering. The fifth floor master. Zhou Xian faltered and then walked out of the tent with Lu Banzwang. Outside the tent, the fifth floor master smiled faintly. Then, with a tap of his finger, a storage ring appeared in front of Zhou Xian and he said, I've gathered everything that young friend needs. Zhou Xian was dumbfounded. He asked, Senior, why is it so fast? The fifth floor master smiled and said, Young friend, you might not know this, but after learning that young friend is in urgent need, the second floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn personally issued orders to the various Drunken Immortal Inns of the Central Divine Continent, ordering them to search for what young friend needs at all costs. That's why it's so fast. Hearing this, Zhou Xian clasped his hands in greeting to the fifth floor master and said, I can't thank you enough. Zhou Xian will truly remember this favor. After saying this, he looked at Lu Banzwang. Lu Banzwang nodded and then called Ling Han and the others over. It wasn't long before they distributed the gold coins to the fifth floor master. The fifth floor master didn't refuse and accepted the gold coins. Then he tapped with his finger and a pure white alchemical pill bottle appeared in front of Zhou Xian and the others. God Union pill. Ling Han and the others were slightly excited when they saw these alchemical pills. That was because with these God Union pills, they would be able to break through to the Divine Union tier right away. If they didn't have these pills, then they would need at least 2 to 3 years to break through to the Divine Union tier or perhaps even longer. At this moment, the fifth floor master tapped again, and a storage ring appeared in front of Ling Han and the others. Everyone looked at the fifth floor master and the fifth floor master smiled and said, There is a clear grade spirit tool in the storage ring, and it was purchased according to your requirements. However, it's best to use it after you reach the Divine Union tier. That way the effects will be even greater. Yi Xian looked at Ling Han and the others and said, "Go to the tent and consume it. Banzwang and I will stand guard for you." The fifth floor master hesitated for a moment and then said, "Young friend, it might be very dangerous to break through now." Yi Xian shook his head and said, "We won't have time after this and they won't give us time either. The earlier we break through the better." The fifth floor master thought for a moment and then nodded. "That's true." He hesitated for a moment and then said, "Young friend, there's a message from the Central Divine Continent. This time, the Central Divine Continent's Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm have started to target you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "What a great reputation." The fifth floor master said seriously, "Young friend, you have a senior sword immortal behind you, so how could they dare to underestimate you? They have allied with the Great Cloud Empire and the three forces have joined forces. Young friend, you and the Jiang country should be extremely careful." Yi Xian nodded and said, "Thank you for the reminder, senior." The fifth floor master nodded and said, "That's right, the drunken immortal Inn has sent 30 Dao soldiers here, and they will arrive by tomorrow at the latest." Lu Banzwang and the others were slightly moved when they heard this. The drunken immortal Inn was determined to support Yi Xian. Actually, this was normal because the drunken immortal Inn had already bet too much on Yi Xian and the mysterious woman. Now they wouldn't stop and they would fight to the end. Yi Xian clasped his fists at the fifth floor master and said, "I'll definitely return the favor in the future." The fifth floor master shook his head slightly and said, "To be more realistic, the drunken immortal Inn does indeed want to rope you in, but it's not completely like that. There is indeed friendship involved. I won't say much, so take care of yourself, young friend." After saying this, he turned around and vanished on the spot. Yi Xian looked at Ling Han and the others. Ling Han and the others were just about to enter the tent, but at this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Go outside the city." Everyone looked at Yi Xian and they were all confused. A cold smirk appeared at the corners of Yi Xian's lips. "I want to break through right under their noses and I want them to stop you." Ling Han hesitated and then said, "Big brother, isn't this too crazy?" Yi Xian grinned and said, "I want to be crazy and I want to play with my life. Don't worry, even if I have to die, the big brother, will be the first to die." As he said this, he waved his hand and said, "Leave the city." Everyone exchanged a look and then followed Yi Xian out of Two Realm City. In an empty space outside the city, Ling Han Mo Yunqi and the others sat cross-legged on the ground after consuming the god-congealing pill. Not far away, Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang stood. Yi Xian pointed the spirit elegant sword at the ground. He looked around and grinned. "Don't hide. Come, I beg you, do me." Wang. A sword cry resounded through the sky. P.S. Thank you for all the readers' blessings and monthly votes yesterday. Thank you so much. I'm temporarily first in the monthly votes, and this is the result of everyone's hard work. No matter if it's Sword Realm or Venerable Sword, no one has ever been first in the monthly votes. So I won't beat around the bush. I want to ask for monthly votes. Friends who don't have monthly votes, please leave a message and praise me well. Praise me for my handsomeness. There's no limit to the number of words. If you praise me well, I'll increase the quality and even maybe there's a mystery prize. Come on, start praising me. Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version. Chapter 148. The battlefield was silent. Yi Xian stood in front of Ling Han and the others with the spirit elegance sword in his hand, which exuded a cold sword light. It was a sharp display. Yi Xian and the sword in his hand gave off such a feeling, as if it could even pierce a hole in the sky. Not far to the right of Yi Xian was Lu Banzwang. Lu Banzwang's eyes were closed and she looked like an old monk in meditation. Actually, she was a little sleepy and wanted to sleep. And on the other side on the city wall was Jiang Jiao and a group of soldiers. Jiang Jiao was still dressed in silver armor. She just looked at Yi Xian below and as she looked she suddenly smiled. One smile could charm hundreds. Below the city wall, the moonlight was weak and only blurry figures could be seen. It could be said that this was the best time for the killers to strike. In this kind of environment they were definitely like tigers that had grown wings. However, it was strangely quiet below the city wall and no one made a move. Because this was too abnormal. Logically speaking, Yi Xian and the soldiers of the Jiang country should be very careful when Ling Han and the others broke through. But now Yi Xian openly allowed Ling Han and the others to break through outside the city, and no soldiers came to help guard. This was very abnormal. There had to be something wrong. For a moment, the killers in the dark did not make a move. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. Under the moonlight, Ling Han and the others broke through to the divine combination tier without any scruples. And they did not have any scruples at all. Because they believed in Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang. Yi Xian swung the Spirit Elegance sword lightly with his right hand. The Spirit Elegance sword was instantly suffused with rays of resplendent sword light. He looked around. There were some people hiding in the dark. However, these people did not dare to come too close. Obviously, after he killed a Dark World Dao soldier previously, these killers were still a little fearful of him. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly walked to Lu Banzwang's side. Although Lu Banzwang was standing ramrod straight, his head was slightly drooping, and he was snoring. Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. He lightly pulled on the corner of Lu Banzwang's clothes. "Don't sleep, be more serious." Lu Banzwang pursed his lips and ignored Yi Xian, continuing to snore. Yi Xian was speechless. Why was this woman so unreliable? Feeling helpless, Yi Xian walked to the other side. Seemingly bored, he suddenly started practicing his swordsmanship. His sword techniques were very simple, just stabbing, lifting, chopping and slicing. These ordinary sword techniques became extraordinary under his control. He was now a sword Dao grandmaster, and he had his own unique understanding and grasp of the sword. Especially when it came to deciding life and death with one sword. Deciding life and death with one sword was a kind of sword Dao belief. My sword will take your life. How domineering was that? How confident was this swordsman? To put it bluntly, he was confident. If the swordsman did not have confidence in himself, this strike would have been weak and harmless. Confidence was also a kind of sword Dao, or rather, it was a part of sword Dao. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly felt his entire body relax, and the exquisite sword in his hand trembled violently. Then it suddenly broke free from his hand and soared into the sky. Everyone in the square looked at the exquisite sword. The exquisite sword left streaks of sword gleam in the sky as it shuttled through the air. The sword could communicate with people. Any of Yi Xian's thoughts could affect the exquisite sword in his hand. Swordsman. On the city wall, everyone looked at the Lingxiu sword with excitement. That was the swordsman of the country of Jiang. If this chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. Jiang Jiu's eyes also had a strange glint. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm from afar. The exquisite sword fell from the sky like a bolt of lightning and landed steadily in Yi Xian's palm. Holding the exquisite sword, Yi Xian suddenly looked around and roared, "Who dares to fight me? Who dares to fight me?" The surroundings were silent and there was no movement at all. Yi Xian pointed his sword towards the darkness in the distance and said fiercely, "I want to fight you. I want to kill." Everyone on the city wall was speechless. There was still no movement at all below the city wall. Yi Xian suddenly loosened his palm, and the exquisite sword turned into a sword gleam and stabbed into the ground nearby. Then he took a dozen steps forward and opened his arms. "Come, I don't need a sword. Please hit me." Just as he finished speaking, a man walked out from the darkness in the distance. The man was in his 20s and wore a black robe with a white background. He was handsome. The man walked in front of Yi Xian and sized up Yi Xian. Then he said, "Qingzhou Martial Leaderboard." Yi Xian suddenly disappeared on the spot. The man's pupils constricted. He sprinted forward and waved his palm. A dazzling palm gleam vibrated out from the center of his palm. At this moment, Yi Xian's fist arrived. It was a ferocious punch. Bang! As soon as their palms and fists collided, both the man and Yi Xian retreated repeatedly at the same time. But it wasn't long before both of them stopped at the same time. The man glanced at Yi Xian. In the next moment, his figure suddenly became illusory. In the blink of an eye, an afterimage flashed and charged straight at Yi Xian. In the distance, Yi Xian slowly clenched his right hand into a fist. Crack! The ground beneath his feet instantly collapsed. At the same time, his right sleeve was instantly shattered into pieces. His entire right arm bulged up while his veins were exposed, and it was an extremely shocking sight. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly smashed his fist forward. A strand of monstrous aura and battle intent surged out from his fist like a volcanic eruption. "I'll smash your head with a single punch." Bang! An explosion resounded abruptly, and then the man retreated explosively over 30 m away. As soon as he stopped moving, the ground beneath his feet instantly cracked apart, and then the cracks spread towards the surroundings. In an instant, the area in an area of over 10 m around him had cracked into a spiderweb. The man wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth and then he raised his head to gaze at Zhou Xian who stood nearby. "You really do cultivate in both the sword and martial arts." Zhou Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. The man's pupils constricted and then he flashed backwards. As soon as he dodged, the ground beneath him had exploded into a deep hole. Moreover, he hadn't even stopped moving when Zhou Xian suddenly appeared in front of him. In the next moment, Zhou Xian raised his right leg and swept it towards the man. The powerful gale from this kick tore apart the clothes on the man's upper body. The man's expression changed drastically. Because he'd lost the initiative, he was unable to gather force and he could only raise his right arm to block. Bang! The man crashed to the ground over 30 m away, and as soon as he landed, Zhou Xian suddenly charged forward. This charge was like a cheetah pouncing on its prey and it was extremely swift. However, Zhou Xian suddenly stopped when he was around 1.5 m away from the man, and then he turned around and smashed his fist forward. Bang! In front of Zhou Xian, a silver arrow was smashed into pieces. But he was pushed back dozens of feet. Not only that, but his entire fist was cracked. Zhou Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. In the distant darkness, a person was aiming at him with a bow and arrow. On the other hand, the man behind him had already retreated over 30 m away, and he'd completely distanced himself from Xianxia. The man stared fixedly at Zhou Xian, and there was dense fear in his eyes. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. Right at this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly stretched out his right hand, and the spirit elegant sword flew out from the ground in the distance before it descended into his hand. The expression of the man behind him instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he was about to retreat. However, Zhou Xian had already arrived in front of him at this moment. A single sword strike to decide life and death. When he saw this sword strike, the man was instantly filled with despair. However, he still had the desire to live. At this critical moment, the profound energy within his body surged madly, and in the blink of an eye, he suddenly slapped his right palm forward. An earth-rank martial technique. As soon as this palm appeared, the ground started to crack inch by inch. It could be said that even an ordinary expert at the divine conglomerate realm would find it difficult to withstand this palm strike. However, as soon as Zhou Xian's sword arrived, the spirit elegant sword directly pierced through the man's entire right arm, and the man instinctively wanted to retreat. However, at this moment Zhou Xian slashed horizontally with his sword. The man's head instantly flew into the air and fresh blood sprayed everywhere. It was extremely bloody. At the moment his head fell to the ground, Zhou Xian suddenly turned around and opened his eyes. His 2 rays of sword light shot out, and a silver arrow in front of him was instantly shattered by the sword light. Zhou Xian gestured with his right hand, and the spatial ring on the man's corpse instantly flew into his palm. There were actually 3 supreme-grade spirit artifacts and over 100,000 supreme-grade spirit stones. There were even over 7 million gold coins. He had made a small fortune. Putting away the spatial ring, Zhou Xian turned around and looked into the distance. He could feel that in the darkness, there was a person aiming a bow and arrow at him. It should be said that there was more than one person in the darkness. The Dark Realm and Kuraki Academy would definitely not give up because if Ling Han and the others reached the divine conglomerate tier, it would undoubtedly be very, very disadvantageous to them. This was something that Zhou Xian was also very clear about. Thus, he knew that the Dark Realm, Kuraki Academy, and even the Great Cloud Empire would soon make their move. And he had no choice but to face them head-on. After Zhou Xian put away the spatial ring, he walked to Lu Banzwang's side. Lu Banzwang was still sleeping and she was really sleeping, not pretending. This was also the reason why Zhou Xian was speechless. This heart was not just an ordinary kind of heart. As Zhou Xian stopped, the surroundings once again quieted down, and only the howling of the cold wind could be heard. Meanwhile, the auras of Ling Han and the others were becoming stronger and stronger. Ling Han and the others were all elites at the peak stage of the Nether Passage tier, so there was definitely no problem in terms of talent and foundation. After obtaining the divine conglomerate pill, it would definitely be no problem for them to reach the divine conglomerate tier. Of course, the biggest problem was whether they could live to break through to the divine conglomerate tier. Yi Xian glanced at Ling Han and the others, his right hand slowly tightening around the spirit elegant sword in his hand. If everyone really couldn't withstand it and died, then Yi Xian would be the first to die. Time passed bit by bit and it was almost dawn. It was the darkest before dawn. Right now, it could be said that one could not even see their own fingers in front of them. Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang stood in front of Ling Han and the others, their faces expressionless. Suddenly, there was a slight movement in the darkness in the distance. Yi Xian lightly pulled on the corner of Lu Banzwang's clothes with his right hand. "Big sister, wake up, there's going to be a fight." Lu Banzwang pushed Yi Xian's hand away and muttered, "Give me 10 more flatbread." Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. *CK, was she talking in her sleep? Sensing that something was slowly approaching, Yi Xian hurriedly pulled on Lu Banzwang's sleeve again. "Customer, your flatbread is here." Lu Banzwang suddenly opened his eyes. Yi Xian, end of this chapter. Chapter 149. Lu Banzwang looked at Yi Xian. "Where's De Bing?" Yi Xian. At this moment, Lu Banzwang suddenly turned to look into the distance. In the next instant she suddenly leaped and then slammed her palm onto the ground. Ping. The entire ground shook violently and something was sent flying in the darkness. At this moment, Lu Banzwang suddenly raised her head. In the next instant she suddenly crossed her arms in front of her to block. Ping. With a muffled sound, Lu Banzwang retreated a few meters. She had just stopped when the ground beneath her feet instantly collapsed. Lu Banzwang turned to look at Yi Xian. "You're from the divine middle continent, be careful." After saying this, she suddenly charged forward. Ping. In the darkness, there was a sudden explosion and soon, Lu Banzwang returned to her original spot. And at this moment Yi Xian's brow suddenly furrowed, because he felt that there were several dozen shadows charging towards Ling Han and the others. They were all top-notch assassins. Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot, and in that instant endless power of the earth instantly gathered around his body. In the next instant the spirit elegant sword in his hand suddenly flew out. Several meters away, an assassin's head was instantly pierced by this sword, and blood splattered everywhere. On the city wall, Jiang Jiu suddenly said, "Attack." She had just spoken when close to 100 soldiers suddenly charged out of the city with long spears and shields in their hands. These 100 people quickly charged around Yi Li and the others. They did not take the initiative to attack, but instead surrounded Ling Han and the others, using their shields to form an iron bucket formation. If it was a one-on-one battle, they would definitely not be a match for these assassins, but if it was a battle, they were completely unafraid of these assassins. There was still a huge difference between soldiers and assassins. Moreover, with Yi Xian holding them back, these soldiers were even more unafraid of these assassins, because Yi Xian's sword basically killed instantly. Wherever the spirit elegant sword went, someone would definitely die. Even an elite of the divine combination tier could not block Yi Xian's sword. It itself had 2 sword intents and it was also added with the power of the earth. Most importantly, it was a true sword. Even if it was a light-grade spirit weapon, the spirit elegant sword could easily shatter it. Furthermore, most of these assassins were only carrying supreme-grade spirit weapons. As soon as the 2 sides clashed, 5 to 6 assassins had already fallen. Right at this moment, an afterimage suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Boom! A loud explosion rang out and Yi Xian retreated over 100 feet. He raised his head and saw a middle-aged man slowly walking towards him. Not a young man. This was not the main point. The main point was that he was dealing with a divine unity realm cultivator, not a 10,000 laws realm cultivator. Furthermore, the person in front of them was clearly not an ordinary divine combination realm cultivator. Those who had been stuck in the divine combination realm for countless years were undoubtedly extremely terrifying. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and did not waste any time. His figure trembled as he charged directly towards Yi Xian. Wherever he passed, the ground began to crack and shatter inch by inch. At the same time, the sound of explosions rang out incessantly. His body tore through the air. Yi Xian tightened his grip on the spirit elegant sword in his right hand. After a moment of silence, he suddenly disappeared on the spot. One sword to decide life and death. Right now he could not afford to be delayed at all. He had to end the battle quickly. Otherwise, the group of soldiers would undoubtedly become very dangerous. In front of Zhou Xian, the middle-aged man suddenly clenched his fists while he was running. In an instant, a terrifying fist force surged out of his body like a breached dam. At the same time, his clothes suddenly bulged up, and on his fists, the light from his fists was as dazzling as the sun. As the fist struck, the sword arrived. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion suddenly rang out. Zhou Xian and the middle-aged man collided and separated. Zhou Xian retreated rapidly, and the middle-aged man in front of him also retreated rapidly. Every step they retreated caused the ground to crack, and the scene in front of them was a mess. Very soon the two of them stopped. The moment they stopped, Zhou Xian charged out once again. This was the benefit of having a strong physical body. Could withstand great power. When he saw Zhou Xian charging directly at him, the middle-aged man's expression instantly changed. Because he still hadn't completely dispersed the impact from before, and his body was still shaking incessantly as if his internal organs had been torn apart. However, Zhou Xian actually seemed to be completely fine. The middle-aged man didn't have the time to think. He suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and his entire body charged out like an arrow that had left the bow. He relied on the momentum of his charge to clench his right hand into a fist, and then a powerful fist force surged out from his fist. Due to the force being too strong and coupled with the impact from before, his entire right hand actually split apart at the moment he converged his strength. At this moment, the middle-aged man couldn't care so much, because if he was unable to withstand this strike, then he might die. The two of them collided head-on once more, and neither of them backed down. A moment of silence ensued. Bang! A figure suddenly flew out, and it was the middle-aged man. Zhou Xian was just about to follow up with another attack when he suddenly turned around to look towards the right. Over a dozen soldiers from the kingdom of Jiang had fallen to the ground not too far away. Zhou Xian's expression instantly became ferocious when he witnessed this scene, and then his figure shook and floated towards the distance. At the same time, a sword slashed through the air. An assassin's head suddenly flew into the air over 30 m away. It was an instant kill. The Dao soldiers from the dark dimension were shocked when they saw Zhou Xian attack them. Because Zhou Xian was able to accurately locate where they were hiding. If an assassin lost this ability, then their strength would plummet greatly. The middle-aged man who fought Zhou Xian just now took a deep and long glance at Zhou Xian, and then he turned around and left. I can't fight him. He thought that he had a chance to kill Zhou Xian and obtain a huge reward because he was very close to the Dharma realm. However, only now did he realize that even if he was halfway into the Dharma realm, he might not be able to defeat Zhou Xian. Even though Zhou Xian's head was very valuable, his own head was even more valuable. The middle-aged man decisively chose to leave. At the very least, it wasn't too late. Jiang Jiu glanced at the sky and spoke softly, "It's almost time. Hold on." The sky was about to brighten. So long as dawn arrived, then these assassins wouldn't dare to attack in such a fearless manner. Die! Right at this moment, Zhou Xian's furious howl suddenly resounded from below the city, and then a strand of snow-white sword chi flashed like a bolt of lightning. A black-clothed assassin was instantly annihilated. However, the soldiers from the kingdom of Jiang were on the verge of being unable to hold on any longer. Meanwhile, Jiang Jiu suddenly leaped down from the city wall. The expressions of the soldiers on the city wall changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and it didn't take long for them to charge out of the city. Jiang Jiu suddenly turned around and roared furiously. "Stand down." These soldiers were all ordinary soldiers, and they were no match for these assassins at all. It could be said that they were truly seeking death by coming out. If the two sides were fighting head-on, these soldiers might still be able to put up a fight due to their advantage in numbers. However, it was nighttime now, and they would only be slaughtered into powder if they came out. However, these soldiers didn't stop. Instead, they all arrived in front of Jiang Jiu. Jiang Jiu glanced at them and roared angrily, "Hurry up and return to the city." Countless soldiers suddenly knelt down on one knee. "We are willing to live and die with the martial and state scholar Yi." Jiang Jiu glanced at the kneeling soldiers in front of her and slowly closed her eyes. Right at this moment, Zhou Xian, who was nearby, suddenly said, "Little Jiu, take them into the city, hurry up." Jiang Jiu turned around to look at Zhou Xian, who was nearby. At this moment, Zhou Xian and Lu Banzwang were already surrounded, and those elite soldiers who were protecting them were also almost unable to hold on. After all, they weren't facing soldiers, but rather elite assassins from the divine middle continent. If it weren't for Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang constantly restraining them, these soldiers would have long since been wiped out. And among the group of people who were surrounding Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang, some were assassins and some weren't. Moreover, new people were constantly joining in. It was obvious that they had rushed over from various places. Jiang Jiu's fists were tightly clenched and she glared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily, "Take them into the city." These ordinary soldiers posed no threat to these assassins in this kind of darkness. Coming here would only be sending them to their deaths. In the distance, Jiang Jiu took a deep look at Yi Xian, then turned around and walked into the city, roaring angrily, "Follow me." Under Jiang Jiu's lead, the soldiers of the Jiang country returned to the city walls. On the city walls, Jiang Jiu glared at Yi Xian below. The soldiers on the city walls were also staring at Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang below. None of them were afraid of death, but they really couldn't help. Helpless. They were really helpless. Especially Jiang Jiu. With her strength she could help, but she couldn't go. As the commander-in-chief of the three armies, every single word and action of hers was related to all the soldiers in Two World City. So, the consequences would be extremely severe if anything were to happen. Moreover, she was unable to help at all. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and Yi Xian slashed down instinctively. Bang! Yi Xian retreated over 30 m along with his sword. The expressions of everyone on the city walls instantly became heavy when they witnessed this scene. A man stood not too far away from Yi Xian. The man was around the age of 20, wore black embroidered clothes, had slanted brows and starry eyes. He held a spear in his hand. The body of the spear was pitch black, but the tip of the spear was snow white, and it emanated a ghastly glow and coldness. Jiang Jiu's expression instantly changed when she saw this person. The first on the martial rankings, Cold Spear Li Mulin. The first on the martial rankings. The expressions of everyone on the city walls instantly changed when they heard this. The martial rankings. The martial rankings was absolutely the most valuable rankings in Pine Prefecture, and the first on the martial rankings wasn't an exaggeration at all. Even the first on the martial rankings had been invited. On the city walls, Jiang Jiu's expression was extremely unsightly. Li Mulin glanced at Yi Xian and then said, "I'll deal with this person. All of you go deal with those who are about to break through." As soon as Li Mulin finished speaking, over 20 black-clothed men with short sabers in their hands suddenly appeared. These black-clothed men directly charged towards Ling Han and the others. Moreover, there were some assassins from the Dark Realm whose true forms couldn't be seen around these black-clothed men. Yi Xian paid no attention to Li Mulin, and instead charged towards those black-clothed men at the side. Li Mulin said coldly, "You want to leave? You're dreaming." As soon as he finished speaking, he directly vanished on the spot. In an instant, a powerful spear intent suffused the surroundings. However, Yi Xian still didn't stop. When Li Mulin arrived around 3 meters behind Yi Xian, a woman in green suddenly appeared in Yi Xian's Kobe. In the next moment, Li Mulin instantly returned to his original spot. The woman in green looked at Li Mulin and then grinned. "You're the first on the martial rankings of Pine Prefecture? No, that's a bit of an exaggeration." As she spoke, she pointed at herself and said, "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm from the Central Divine Prefecture Monster Rankings. P.S. Please give me a ticket." Chapter 150. The Genius Rankings. It was Lu Banzwang's friend. Actually, the woman had arrived at Twin World City a long time ago, but she hadn't shown herself. That was naturally Yi Xian's idea. Take Kuraki Academy and the Dark Dimension by surprise. Li Mulin glanced coldly at the woman, and then he suddenly vanished. The corners of the woman's mouth curled up slightly, and then she flicked her finger forward. Her finger just happened to touch the tip of a spear. Bang! The spear shook violently, and then Li Mulin was instantly blasted over 30 m away. Li Mulin glanced at the trembling spear in his hand, and then a solemn expression appeared in his eyes. He was just about to attack again when a white-robed old man appeared not too far away from the woman. He was the exalted guardian of Kuraki Academy's main academy. The white-robed old man glanced at the woman. "Can you give my Kuraki Academy some face?" My academy will definitely thank you generously in the future. The woman glanced at the white-robed old man and smiled. Can you give me some face? The white-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly. You're not giving me any face. The corners of the woman's mouth curled up slightly. What? You intend to threaten me? As she spoke, she pointed at the white-robed old man. Hit me if you can. Bring it on. The white-robed old man slowly clenched his right fist when he heard this. He naturally wanted to attack, but when he thought about how the woman was on the genius rankings, he didn't dare attack. It was undoubtedly extremely difficult to ascend the genius rankings, and it was utterly impossible for ordinary people to ascend it. Practically all those who were able to ascend it had the backing of a great power. It couldn't be said to be 100%, but at least 90% of them definitely had the backing of an enormous power. Moreover, the rules of the Central Divine Prefecture were that if the younger generation were to fight, then the older generation couldn't interfere. At the very least, they couldn't interfere in public. Otherwise, they would be breaking the rules. If he did, then it was very likely that he would make an enemy of Kuraki Academy, and it would be an extremely formidable enemy. The white-robed old man's expression was unsightly to the extreme. He truly never imagined that Zhou Xian would know so many geniuses from the Central Divine Prefecture, and they were even willing to live and die with Zhou Xian. This was something that neither Kuraki Academy nor Dark World had expected. At this moment, the white-robed elder suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. In front of Zhou Xian, there were already more than 20 black-robed corpses on the ground. Blood was everywhere. No one could block Zhou Xian's sword. Previously he wanted to let Li Mulan stall Zhou Xian, but now it seemed that this plan had fallen through. The white-robed old man glanced at the distant horizon. There were at most 15 minutes before daybreak. Let's go all out. The white-robed elder turned and looked to the right. Attack. After a moment of silence, a long saber suddenly pierced through the night sky, pointing straight at Zhou Xian. The green-robed woman glanced at the long saber. She had no intention of attacking, nor could she because Li Mulan was staring at her. On the other side, Zhou Xian suddenly stopped. In the blink of an eye, he thrust his sword towards the right. Bang! The long saber suddenly stopped, but the momentum of the saber didn't disappear. Not only that, the spirit elegance sword in Zhou Xian's hand started to vibrate violently. Zhou Xian's right hand spun slightly, and a wave of sword intent and battle intent surged into the spirit elegance sword. In the next moment, the long saber was sent flying back from the impact. However, the next moment, a hand suddenly grabbed the hilt of the saber. In the blink of an eye, the long saber slashed down at the top of Zhou Xian's head. Zhou Xian raised his sword and stabbed. The stab directly hit the blade of the long saber. Bang! Zhou Xian retreated 100 feet with his sword. As soon as Zhou Xian stopped, the broadsword once again slashed towards his head. The broadsword slashed down. It had the power to split mountains and split the earth. Zhou Xian took a step back. In the next moment, the ground beneath his feet cracked, and he charged forward with his sword in hand. The sword struck. The saber and sword collided again. Bang! The ground over 100 feet around Zhou Xian instantly cracked, and he himself once again retreated over 100 feet. After Zhou Xian stopped, he raised his head to look. Not far from him, a long-haired man was running towards him with a long saber in hand. The man's hair was very long, reaching his waist, and his arms were wrapped with many black chains. He stared fixedly at Zhou Xian, his eyes cold and emotionless. On the other side, there were already people charging towards Ling Han and the others. Seeing this scene, the white-robed old man not far away slowly clenched his right hand. Would there be more changes? Just as this thought appeared in his mind, a man suddenly appeared in front of Ling Han and the others. The man looked 60 to 70% similar to Ling Han. Looking at the assassins charging at him, the man raised his hands in the air, and in an instant his arms started burning. In the next moment, the man suddenly slapped the ground. Ping! The ground instantly cracked, and at the same time, a monstrous wave of fire shook the area. The two black-robed men in the lead were instantly swallowed by the wave of fire, and the remaining people retreated rapidly. The man stood up, glanced at Ling Han behind him, and then turned to look at Zhou Xian. At this moment, the man with the saber had already charged in front of Zhou Xian. Another slash. The long-haired man's saber technique was very simple, and there were no fancy movements. However, every slash was extremely domineering, and had the power to annihilate an army of 1,000. Xian didn't retreat but instead advanced. He took a step forward and stabbed out with his sword. One strike to decide life and death. This strike was the same as the long-haired man's saber, and there were no fancy movements. However, when this strike appeared, the eyes of the green-robed woman not far away and the man in front of Ling Han on the right narrowed slightly, and there was a trace of seriousness in their eyes. One strike. One strike. The two collided again in the most violent way possible. Xian instantly retreated 30 meters, and the long-haired man in the distance also instantly retreated 30 meters. However, the moment he stopped, the saber in his hand instantly shattered, and turned into a pile of powder that scattered on the ground. Meanwhile, his arm had already cracked into a spider web and blood was gushing out. The long-haired man raised his head to look at Xian. His right hand slowly clenched and he was just about to attack again. However, it was at this moment that the assassins in the surroundings suddenly retreated like the tide. The sky was bright. Seeing this, the expressions of Zhang Jiu and the others on the city wall instantly relaxed. Once the sky was bright, the battle prowess of the assassins would decrease greatly, and at this time, these elite soldiers would be able to resist them. Of course, they had to fight with numbers. If it was nighttime, then there was absolutely no way to fight and they could only be slaughtered. The sky became brighter and very soon the surroundings became clear. And there were only 4 people left facing Xian and the others. The white-robed old man, the long-haired man Li Linmu and a middle-aged man dressed in a black robe. It was he who had been holding Lu Banzwang back. The white-robed old man glanced coldly at Xian and said, "You want to play? My Karaki Academy will play with you. Let's see who loses first." As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 of them turned around and left. Xian lowered his head and glanced at his right arm. At this moment, his right arm had lost all feeling, and it hadn't been easy for him to deal with the long-haired man just now. Actually, this was normal. Karaki Academy was definitely aware of his current strength, so how could they bring ordinary people? The people that came would only grow stronger and stronger. This time, Karaki Academy and the Dark World were prepared to fight him to the death. Meanwhile, the green-clothed woman suddenly walked over to Lu Banzwang. She suddenly walked over to Lu Banzwang, and then she suddenly hugged him and kissed him fiercely under the watchful eyes of countless people. She didn't kiss his face, she kissed his mouth. At the sight of this, Xian and others were dumbfounded. The green-clothed woman let go of Lu Banzwang and chuckled, "Baby Lu, did you miss me?" Lu Banzwang glanced at the green-clothed woman and said, "There are so many men out there but you only like women. There's something wrong with your head." Xian was speechless. The green-clothed woman smiled naughtily. "Actually, women are quite fun to play with each other." He. At the side, Xian kept shaking his head as he listened. This woman was extraordinarily powerful. At this moment, the green-clothed woman looked at Xian and the others and asked, "Your new friends?" Lu Banzwang nodded. The green-clothed woman sized up Xian and said, "Dual cultivator of the sword and martial arts. No, he also cultivates his physical body. Triple cultivator. He's barely passable. Unfortunately, he's only a grandmaster of the sword Dao. If he was a sword master, he could make a name for himself in the divine central continent." Lu Banzwang's expression became slightly solemn when he heard this. In truth, only she knew what the green-clothed woman meant by making a name for herself. It was no ordinary adventure. At this moment, Zhang Jiu led a group of soldiers over to Xian and the others. Zhang Jiu was expressionless as she looked at the corpses of the Jiang country's soldiers on the ground beside Xian. These soldiers were all elite soldiers of the Jiang country who had risked their lives for the Jiang country countless times. A moment later, Zhang Jiu said softly, "Take them back and give them a proper burial. Make sure their families are well compensated so that they don't have to worry for the rest of their lives." Soon, the soldiers behind her took the corpses away. Zhang Jiu looked at Xian. Xian actually had many wounds on his body and there were even a few cuts on his face. Xian said in a low voice, "You have to be careful. It's very likely that those assassins will target you." Zhang Jiu said softly, "Imperial Father has already sent 300 death guards from the palace. These 300 are elites that the Jiang country has secretly nurtured. They will be responsible for my safety day and night." Xian nodded. "That's good." After saying this, he turned around to look at Ling Han and the others. At this moment, their auras were becoming stronger and stronger, but they still needed at least 2 days to break through to the divine combination tier. 2 days. And in these 2 days he and Lu Banzwang could not take even half a step away. As if he had thought of something, he suddenly looked at the man who looked like Ling Han. How should I address you? The man glanced at Yi Xian. Ling Yu, cousin Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, many thanks. Ling Yu shook his head. I should be the one thanking you. If it weren't for you, my disappointing younger brother would probably already be dead. Yi Xian said in a low voice. Next, Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm might make new moves. As he said this, he clasped his fists at the green-clothed woman and Ling Yu. Many thanks, you do. Ling Yu nodded slightly. He was naturally going to stay behind. He had come this time for Ling Han. On the other side, the green-clothed woman suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, it's very expensive for me to make a move. You asked me to stay behind, so how are you going to repay me? As she said this, she looked up and down at Yi Xian, and a mischievous smile appeared at the corner of her lips. You're also very handsome, hee. Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said seriously, tell me, what position do you want? I'll definitely cooperate with you. The green-clothed woman. P.S. Our venerable sword doesn't have many readers who read the original version. If possible, please come to Zongheng Chinese Network to subscribe and support us. Especially the old readers, I really need your support and I need you to return. Finally, everyone can go to other people's book reviews and help to advertise. Remember, don't say that I asked you to go. Asking for tickets, asking for subscriptions. Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version. Chapter 151. Who had he Yi Xian been afraid of? Who had he Yi Xian been afraid of? He had never had an opponent. Nearby, the green-robed woman was also stunned. Evidently, she had not expected such an answer from Yi Xian. In the blink of an eye, she suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian, lightly lifted Yi Xian's chin with her index finger and smiled wickedly. You know all kinds of positions? Really? Evidently, she did not want to admit defeat. Yi Xian looked at Lu Banzwang and Lu Banzwang said calmly, you guys play, I'll watch. Yi Xian. At this time the green-robed woman blinked. Why don't we play together? Yi Xian shook his head. This woman was really too powerful. He did not continue to argue with the green-robed woman. He sat cross-legged on the ground and then swallowed a golden sore pill. Not only had he expended a lot of energy in the previous battle, but he had also suffered injuries all over his body, especially his arm, which was still a little numb. The most important thing now was to heal. Because he did not know when Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm would start the next round of attacks. Lu Banzwang suddenly sat on the ground, then leaned against a rock and began to sleep. Sleep? She was actually not injured because when she had fought with the middle-aged man, he had only been trying to restrain her. Thus the two of them had not fought to the death. She wanted to, but the middle-aged man did not give her a chance and continued to retreat. However, if she wanted to leave, the middle-aged man would catch up to her. She was not injured. She was just tired and wanted to sleep. The green-robed woman glanced at Lu Banzwang, shook her head slightly and said softly, instead of being the young mistress of the Lu clan, you had to come out and suffer. However, this is also good. The current you is much stronger than before. As she spoke, she also sat down and then leaned against Lu Banzwang's body. On the other side, Ling Yu sat cross-legged on the ground, his eyes closed, and he was meditating. Behind them, the auras of Ling Han and the others were becoming stronger and stronger. Inside the city. After Jiang Jiu returned to the city, he immediately returned to his tent. He had just returned when an elder quietly appeared. The elder bowed slightly to Jiang Jiu. The Yu Nation and the Chu Nation were originally going to retreat, but for some reason they suddenly stopped. The armies of the two countries are stationed not far from the border of my Jiang country, and they have yet to make a move. Jiang Jiu squinted his eyes. Great Cloud Empire has made a move. The old man nodded. That's what your majesty guessed. Although Great Cloud Empire is far away from our Jiang country, if they really want to attack us, I'm afraid. At this point he glanced at Jiang Jiu and said no more. Jiang Jiu sat on the chair with a hint of worry in his eyes. Great Cloud Empire. This was the largest empire in the Qing province. If Great Cloud Empire really attacked Jiang country, the fate of Jiang country would be Ningguo. In a certain hall in the palace, Tuoba Yen was wearing a very large fur coat. She leaned back on the dragon throne with a pile of memorials in front of her. At this time, a shadow suddenly floated into the hall. After entering the hall, the shadow floated to a dark corner of the hall. Tuoba Yen glanced at the corner. "How is it?" The shadow replied, "Replying to your majesty, the Tang Empire has been defeated. Now the Jiang country has detained the king of Tang Empire, Tang Mu, and the grand marshal of the Tang Empire, Pei Xiaohu. I think the conditions have not been completely negotiated. However, with these two people in our hands, the Tang Empire is the meat of the Jiang country. Let's see how the Jiang country eats it." Tuoba Yen said indifferently, "Get to the point." The shadow bowed slightly and continued. The youngster named Yi Xian blocked the attack of the Kuraki Academy and the Dark World. Tuoba Yen asked, "Did you make a move?" The shadow shook his head. "No, because two monstrous geniuses from the divine central continent suddenly made a move. However, according to our investigation, the Dark World and the Kuraki Academy have not stopped. There are still people continuously stepping into the Jiang country's territory. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. There might also be people from the Great Cloud Empire." Great Cloud Empire. Tuoba Yan's eyes narrowed slightly, a cold light flickering in them. The Great Cloud Empire. Why did that King Kaoshan intervene in this matter? At this point she was silent for a moment. Suddenly her pupils shrank. Could it be that he wants to take this opportunity to unify the entire Azure province? Unify the Azure province. The hall suddenly became quiet. After a moment, Tuoba Yen looked at the shadow in the corner. "Keep an eye on the Jiang country and that Yi Xian. If there is a critical moment, you can help." The shadow hesitated for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, if we make a move, I'm afraid we will offend the Kuraki Academy and the Dark World. To offend these two forces for someone who is not from our Ning country, I'm afraid." Tuoba Yen suddenly narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp as a knife. "Why? Do I need you to teach me how to do things?" The shadow hurriedly knelt on one knee. "This subordinate doesn't dare." Tuoba Yen retracted his gaze. "Aunt Jiang." As his voice fell, an old woman and an old man appeared in the hall. The old woman bowed deeply to Tuoba Yen. "Your Majesty, this old subject didn't discipline her well." Tuoba Yen said indifferently, "Your Majesty, your heart cares for the Ning country and speaks frankly. You should be rewarded. Go to the martial skill library to choose a martial skill." Hearing this, the shadow hurriedly said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." At this time Tuoba Yen said, "You are an assassin, a death servant, not a strategist. What I need is a sword to kill for me in the Ning country, not a mouth. After receiving the martial skill, immediately withdraw from the shadow guard and stay for observation." Hearing Tuoba Yan's words, the shadow was stunned and then hurriedly knelt down. Just as he was about to speak, Aunt Jiang suddenly shouted angrily, "Stand down." The shadow trembled slightly and then turned and vanished on the spot. Aunt Jiang looked at Tuoba Yen and bowed slightly. This old subject didn't discipline her well. Tuoba Yen shook his head. Little Dai is young and doesn't know her limits. She needs to be taught a lesson. Her talent is excellent and she has a special physique. Her future is limitless. Aunt Jiang can observe her in secret. If she is not disloyal this time, nurture her with all your might in the future." The old woman bowed deeply. "Understood." Tuoba Yen said again, "Send people to keep an eye on the country of Jiang. At the critical moment, let the shadow guard help." The old woman hesitated, wanting to speak but stopping. Tuoba Yen said softly, "I know you have concerns. Helping the country of Jiang and Yi Xian will offend Kuraki Academy, the Dark World, and the Great Cloud Empire. However, have you ever thought that it might not be just a matter between Yi Xian, Kuraki Academy, and the Dark World?" At this point she got up and looked out of the distant hall. The situation in Azure province may change. Compared to Kuraki Academy and the Dark World, I am more willing to believe in him. Two World City. Jiang Jiao came out of the city gate and came before Yi Xian. She sat in front of Yi Xian. "I have something I want to hear your opinion on." Yi Xian looked at Jiang Jiao. "What is it?" Jiang Jiao said in a deep voice. "The imperial court has been arguing about how to deal with the country of Tang. Some want to detain them and force the country of Tang to pay a large sum of money to redeem them, while some want the country of Tang to become a vassal of our country of Jiang, and some want to eliminate the country of Tang once and for all." At this point she looked at Yi Xian. "What do you think?" Yi Xian asked in return. "What about you? What do you think?" Jiang Jiu glared at Yi Xian. I'm asking you. Yi Xian smiled. I don't understand these things. Jiang Jiu said in a deep voice. Tell me what you think. Yi Xian thought for a while then said, let them go. Jiang Jiu suddenly lifted his head to look at Yi Xian, a little shocked. Yi Xian said softly, letting the country of Tang pay a large sum of money to redeem them will cause internal turmoil in the country of Tang or even split. Moreover, they will become more and more resentful towards the country of Jiang, which will force them to side with the Great Cloud Empire. As for annihilating the country of Jiang, the current country of Jiang doesn't have the strength to completely annihilate the country of Tang. This chapter is not over, please continue. At this point he paused for a moment then continued softly. If we don't let them go, the Great Cloud Empire is likely to cultivate a puppet in the country of Tang. At that time it will be meaningless for us to capture them. Let them go and form an alliance with them. Alliance? Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian. The two countries are mortal enemies. Yi Xian shook his head. You should know the current situation of the country of Jiang. The main force of the country of Tang is still there. If they attack Two World City at all costs, coupled with the country of Yu, country of Chu and Great Cloud Empire, the situation of the country of Jiang will be even worse. Jiang Jiu said solemnly, but what if they go back and join the Great Cloud Empire? Yi Xian smiled. They have already been abandoned by Kuraki Academy and Dark World once, and have paid a painful price for it. I believe that they will not follow Kuraki Academy and Dark World anymore. Jiang Jiu looked straight at Yi Xian. What if? Yi Xian said with a smile. Then wipe them out again. Wipe them out completely. Wipe out the Tang Empire completely. Tell them this. Tell them I said it. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian for a long time. Finally, she suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian and gently touched the wound on Yi Xian's face. You can actually leave. Leave. Yi Xian can indeed leave. If he leaves, the powerhouses of the Myriad Law realm can't make a move, and Kuraki Academy and Dark World can't do anything to him. Yi Xian smiled. Here there are my brothers, people I care about, and Azure Billow Academy. I promised Old Man Ji. Jiang Jiu smiled. What about me? Yi Xian was slightly surprised, then smiled. Also someone I care about. The corner of Jiang Jiu's mouth slightly raised. How much? Yi Xian said seriously. Very much. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian for a long time. Finally she gently hugged Yi Xian. If I fall into the water with little N, who will you save first? Hearing this, Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. Jiang Jiu giggled. She gently patted Yi Xian's cheek. What a fool. After saying that she turned and left. Dressed in silver armor she was graceful and graceful. Yi Xian shook his head. What are these women thinking all day? An hour later the emperor and Pei Xiao who suddenly left Two Realm City. The two came in front of Yi Xian. Tang Mu glanced at Yi Xian. Goodbye. Yi Xian nodded. Take care. Pei Xiao who walked in front of Yi Xian and looked directly at Yi Xian. Aren't you afraid that we will go back and seek refuge with Kuraki Academy and the Great Cloud Empire? Yi Xian faced Pei Xiao who, if you believe me, as long as the state of Jiang exists, the Tang Empire will not perish. Pei Xiao who said, can you represent the state of Jiang? Yi Xian shook his head. No. But I can represent myself. If the state of Jiang breaks the covenant, I will be the first to disagree. Of course, if the Tang Empire breaks the covenant, I promise that there will be no Tang Empire in this world in the future. Pei Xiao who took a deep look at Yi Xian. If the state of Jiang does not break the covenant, as long as I, Pei Xiao who am here, the Tang Empire will not break the covenant. At this moment, a black-clothed man suddenly appeared not far from Yi Xian and the others. The black-clothed man quickly came in front of Yi Xian and cupped his fists. Young Master Yi, the state of Yu and the state of Chu suddenly launched a raid. The state of Jiang has fallen to the south and east. The armies of the two countries have entered the state of Jiang. Yi Xian frowned slightly. How can this be? The black-clothed man said solemnly, the Great Cloud Empire has made a move. At this time, Jiang Jiu suddenly left the city with a team of cavalrymen. Jiang Jiu came in front of Yi Xian. I'm going to support them. Yi Xian was silent. On the side, Pei Xiao who suddenly said, Ninth Princess, if you believe the old man can bring the Black Blade Guards and the Death Battalion with you. Jiang Jiu looked at Pei Xiao who, thank you. After speaking she looked at Yi Xian and Yi Xian faced her. Wait for me. Jiang Jiu smiled. Don't worry. Even if I die, I will take a look at you and listen to your voice before I die. Otherwise, I will not die in peace. End of this chapter. Chapter 152. A quarter of an hour later, Xianxia left with the soldiers of Two Realms City. Along with Xianxia, the Black Blade Guards and the Daredevil Battalion of Tang also left. Now Two Realms City had become an empty city again. Could be said that if Tang suddenly launched a sneak attack, they could easily take down Two Realms City. However, Tang didn't do so. The Tang Empire and the Jiang Empire had been enemies for generations, and the enmity between them wasn't small. However, this time they hated Kuraki Academy even more. The previous incident made them realize that Kuraki Academy and Dark World didn't take them seriously at all. They were just pawns that could be abandoned at any time. They didn't care about Tang's life or death at all. Of course, there was another reason, and that was Yi Xian. Yi Xian was still alive. As long as Yi Xian was alive, he was a deterrent to Tang, and they wouldn't dare to have any other thoughts. Outside Two Realms City, Yi Xian stood in front of Ling Han and the others. Their auras were getting stronger and stronger, surpassing the Nether Passage tier. Divine Combination tier. Yi Xian looked at Ling Han and the others and said softly, "Brothers, work harder." Kuraki Academy and Dark World targeted him, while Great Cloud Empire targeted Jiang. It could be said that both he and Jiang weren't in a good situation. At this moment, the woman in green suddenly said, "You will drag yourself to death if you continue like this." Yi Xian looked at the woman in green and she said calmly, "With your talent, if you cultivate without any distractions, you will definitely have great achievements in the future. However, you let yourself get involved in these messy disputes, which is not a good thing for you personally." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Responsibility." The woman in green frowned. "Responsibility?" Yi Xian nodded. "A man should shoulder his responsibilities instead of running away. Of course, it will be easy if you run away. But if you are relaxed, the people around you will be very tired." At this point he looked up at the far end. If he ran away, what about Mo Yunqi by Zai Jianji Zhongluan Academy Jiangjiu? As well as Ling Han and the others. The green-robed woman glanced at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Soon time passed slowly. The sky was dark. There was no one left in Two Realms City. It was completely silent, and it was the same outside the city. Yi Xian and the others were surrounded by pitch-black darkness. Yi Xian sat in front of Ling Han and the others, sword in hand. His face was expressionless, and the spirit-elegant sword in his hand was also extremely calm. Not far away, Lu Banzwang sat on a rock, still eating the flatbread. The green-robed girl lay on Lu Banzwang's lap and was also eating the flatbread. On the other side, Ling Yu sat cross-legged on the ground with his hands hidden in his sleeves like an old monk in meditation. The surroundings were silent. The green-robed woman glanced at Ling Han and the others. "They should be here soon." Yi Xian nodded. The auras of Ling Han and the others had already reached a critical point. As long as they broke through this critical point, they would be able to reach the Divine Unity tier. Once they reached the Divine Unity tier, the strength of Ling Han and the others could be said to have skyrocketed. One had to know that they currently had light-grade spirit tools on them. Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm definitely knew this as well. Thus, tonight would be another fierce battle. Time passed slowly and soon it was dawn. At this time the surroundings became even darker. Suddenly there was a tearing sound in the darkness. Yi Xian raised his sword and stabbed. On the tip of the sword was a black arrow. The arrow didn't shatter but instead spun rapidly. The powerful force shook the ground, and the spirit-elegant sword began to tremble violently. At this time the green-robed woman nearby suddenly leaped up. In the next moment she had already appeared several meters away. She took a quick step forward and lightly made a seal with her right hand. Ping. The green-robed woman suddenly floated back to her original spot. She had just landed and the ground shook violently. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. The ground within several meters instantly cracked into a spider web. The green-robed woman's eyes narrowed slightly. The peak stage of the Divine Unity tier. To be able to use power to such an extent, not simple. In the distance, a man walked out from the darkness. The man wore black clothes and his hands were wrapped in a layer of sackcloth. He didn't wear shoes and his feet were wrapped in sackcloth as well, revealing only his toes. The green-robed woman's beautiful brows instantly knit together when she saw the man. "Lian Zhan, I never expected you to come here." Lianzhan. A monstrous genius on the monstrous genius rankings. The man called Lianzhan glanced at the green-robed woman. 200 million gold coins and 500,000 supreme-grade spirit stones as long as I can keep you busy. What do you think? The green-robed woman smiled. All right, even I'm slightly tempted. Lianzhan spread out his right hand and then slowly clenched it. Since I've taken their money, I naturally have to put in some effort. Come fight. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly shot out explosively. A tearing sound that made one's scalp go numb instantly resounded in the surroundings. The corners of the green-robed woman's mouth curled up slightly. Then let's fight. As soon as she finished speaking, she charged out as well. On the other side, Lu Banzwang stood up because a middle-aged man had appeared not too far away from her. The middle-aged man was tall, and he emanated a fierce aura and imposing aura. He was the middle-aged man who'd restrained her last night. Lu Banzwang glanced at the man and said, I'll definitely kill you. As soon as she finished speaking, she put away the flatbread, and her figure shook as she charged directly at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a hint of seriousness in them. In the next moment he suddenly stomped his right foot, and with the help of the powerful pushing force from the ground he shot out explosively like a cannonball. Boom! As soon as the two of them approached each other, a deafening explosion resounded in the surroundings. In the next moment the two of them separated upon contact, but Lu Banzwang quickly charged forward again. Nearby, Ling Yu suddenly stood up. In front of him was Li Mulin, who was ranked first on the Azure Province martial roll. Without any nonsense, Li Mulin suddenly charged at Ling Yu. The spear in his hand suddenly trembled, and a cold light flickered on the tip of the spear. At the same time, a powerful spear aura swept towards Ling Yu like a storm, and the powerful spear aura directly uprooted the ground. It was an extremely shocking sight. Ling Han raised his head to look at Li Mulin, and his hands that were hidden in his sleeves suddenly stretched out. Boom boom. His palms suddenly burst into flames, and in the next instant his right hand clenched into a fist. In the next instant he took a step forward and threw a punch. This punch directly collided with the spear in Li Mulin's hand. Boom! A wave of flames instantly engulfed the spear, and at this moment, Li Mulin spun the spear in front of him, and a wave of spear rays surged out. Ping! The two of them instantly retreated. However, in the next instant the two of them once again charged forward. Beside them, Yi Xian glanced at the woman in green and the others before raising his head to look at the darkness in the distance. The woman in green and the others were all pinned down. Who was his opponent? They didn't have to wait for long. In the distance, a man suddenly walked out from the darkness. He was dressed in a dark green embroidered robe, and his hair was tied up with a jade hairpin. His eyes were clear and calm, and there was not the slightest hint of emotion in them. There was a small red snake coiled around his right arm. The small snake was only the size of an index finger, and its eyes were cold and sinister, causing one to tremble in fear. The man walked to a position several meters in front of Yi Xian, and looked directly at Yi Xian. Without any nonsense he lightly tapped his right foot on the ground. The ground in front of Yi Xian and the man instantly split open, and then a powerful force suddenly shook out from within the cracked ground. This force pressed directly towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian's face was expressionless as he turned slightly to the side, and at the instant he did so, his left hand suddenly blasted out with a punch. Bang! The two forces exploded as soon as they came into contact, and Yi Xian was shaken to the point of retreating repeatedly. However, the man had suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and he pressed the fingers of his right hand together before pointing them forward. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. It moved towards Yi Xian's throat. It was a very ordinary finger, and it didn't contain any fluctuation of profound energy. As soon as this finger was pointed out, a sword stabbed over. Spirit Grey Sword. However, the man didn't dodge and his finger directly tapped the tip of Spirit Grey's sword. Bang! Spirit Grey's sword shook violently, and Yi Xian instantly retreated by over 30 meters again. As soon as he stopped, the man in the distance suddenly opened his 5 fingers, and the next moment he lightly shook at Yi Xian through the air. The space in front of Yi Xian suddenly shook. Bang! As if he had suffered a heavy blow, Yi Xian instantly retreated by over 30 meters. As soon as he stopped, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and then, a shadow had already arrived in front of him. It was that man. At this moment Xian suddenly opened his eyes. His 2 rays of sword light shot out from his eye sockets. Bang bang. Following the sound of 2 explosions, the man returned to his original position. He glanced at his right hand, and in the center of his right palm there were 2 cracks. The man raised his head and looked at Xian, who was not far away. Using the sword as eyes, this is the first time I've seen it. Xian twisted his neck. Come, take a sword from me. As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly tapped his right foot, and in an instant, the power of the earth gathered around his body. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly disappeared from where he was. In the field, a ray of sword light flashed by. A sword strike to decide life and death. A sword strike that contained 2 types of intents and the power of the earth. The man's face was emotionless when he saw this sword strike approach him. He suddenly took a step forward, and then he tapped with his finger. This finger tapped directly onto the tip of the spirit sword. A moment of silence ensued. Bang. The man instantly retreated by over 30 meters. As soon as he stopped moving, a sword slashed towards him at an extremely swift speed. The man stretched out his right hand and swept his fingers horizontally. This sweep swept directly onto the blade of the spirit sword. Bang. The spirit sword was instantly swept flying. But right at this moment, Xian suddenly appeared in front of him, and Xian's fist smashed down. A punch to the head. The man suddenly opened his mouth and his palm pressed onto Xian's fist. Bang. The man didn't retreat an inch, but the ground in an area of over 100 meters behind him instantly shattered. The man's fingers suddenly closed around Xian's fist, and he was just about to attack when Xian suddenly opened his eyes. The man's pupils constricted slightly, and his left hand swept forward. Bang bang. Following 2 muffled sounds, the man retreated more than 30 meters. As soon as he stopped, Xian appeared in front of him with a sword in hand. Then a sword slashed towards his face. The man narrowed his eyes and his hands suddenly closed together. With this, he directly closed around Xian's spirit sword. However, the man's legs were half squatting. Xian was about to continue attacking when suddenly, an afterimage attacked from the side. Xian's expression changed slightly. Just as he was about to retract his sword, the man in front of him held onto the spirit sword tightly, and he couldn't pull it out at all. At this critical moment, Xian suddenly released his hand, and his right hand clenched into a fist as he punched towards the right. Bang. Xian felt that his fist had landed on a hard piece of dark steel, and his entire arm instantly went numb. At this moment, the man in front of him suddenly lifted his leg and kicked his abdomen. Bang. Xian retreated dozens of meters. Xian had just landed on the ground when an arrow suddenly tore through the air. The arrow was extremely fast and the timing was extremely crafty. It was so crafty that he couldn't dodge it at all. Xian kicked off with his right foot and he summoned the armor of earth. Bang. An arrow pierced the space between his brows, but it was forcefully blocked by the power of earth. However, the skin under the armor of earth split open. Nearby, a voice rang out from the darkness. There are only 30 monsters on the Divine Central Continent monster ranking. Now 3 of them have gathered here to kill you. Xian, you should feel honored. 3 monsters. End of this chapter. Chapter 153. 3 monsters. Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. In the distance, the man held his spirit elegant sword tightly. The spirit elegant sword trembled violently, but it couldn't break free from the man's grip. Not far from the man's right stood a man in gray. The man was about 20 years old, slim, and had some black iron rings wrapped around his hands. In the dark there was also an archer. The 3 of them were elites at the peak of the Divine Combination tier. And this Divine Combination tier wasn't an ordinary Divine Combination tier. The monsters on the monster list. It could be said that the 3 of them weren't weaker than Xian at all. If the 3 of them joined forces, Xian wouldn't be able to block them at all. Xian slowly clenched his fists. The power of the earth surged madly into his body, and a powerful fighting spirit swept out from his body. Fight. Facing 3 monsters on the monster list, there was no fear in Xian's eyes, only fighting spirit. He couldn't retreat and he definitely couldn't die. Because if he retreated and died, Ling Han and the others behind him would definitely die. Fight. Xian's expression became slightly sinister, and in the next moment he suddenly stomped his right foot. Hong! The ground beneath his feet instantly cracked and collapsed. Meanwhile, Yi Xian himself had already charged out. He was very fast and almost instantly appeared in front of the man who held his sword. In front of Yi Xian, the man's pupils contracted. At this moment he had no choice but to let go of the spirit elegant sword, take a step forward and throw a punch at Yi Xian. At this moment Yi Xian's right sleeve suddenly exploded, and a powerful force instantly surged into his right arm. Dragon power. At this moment he activated the dragon power in the nation token that Tuoba Fu had gifted him. In the instant that the dragon power and the power of the earth converged, Yi Xian's right arm was directly ruptured and blood splattered everywhere. The force was too strong, too strong. Ping. As soon as the two fists collided, the man was instantly sent flying 500 feet away. The man had just landed on the ground when his entire right arm burst apart. However, the moment the man was sent flying, the man in gray on the other side suddenly swept his leg at Yi Xian's abdomen. Bang! Yi Xian was also sent flying. Not only that, but an arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness. Yi Xian had just landed on the ground when the arrow shot into his chest. However, it was forcefully blocked by the armor of earth. Nevertheless, the skin under the armor of earth cracked open. The armor of Gaia could not completely block the power of this arrow. Yi Xian stood up and the spirit elegant sword flew into his hand. It was his left hand because his right hand was cracked and the bones inside could be seen clearly. At this moment, the gray-robed man suddenly appeared in front of him. At the same time, an arrow shot out from the darkness. In front of Yi Xian, the gray-robed man's right foot was pressed against the ground behind him. He punched forward with both fists and the iron hoops on his arms flew out instantly. Sensing the power in the iron hoops, Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. He held the spirit elegant sword in his left hand and slashed forward. This time he only used the power of the earth and did not dare to activate the dragon power. His body could not withstand the combination of the two powers. The sword slashed down. Bang! The spirit elegant sword shook violently and Yi Xian was directly sent flying more than 100 feet away. Just as he stopped, an arrow was already in front of him. Yi Xian opened his eyes suddenly. The arrow exploded a few inches away from his glabella. Yi Xian retreated several feet again. A stream of blood flowed slowly from his glabella. He was already exhausted. From the beginning until now he had already severely exhausted his body. In addition to the injuries on his body, he was in an extremely bad situation right now. In the distance, the man with the red snake on his arm suddenly vanished on the spot. When he appeared again he was already in front of Yi Xian. The man suddenly slammed his left palm down towards Yi Xian's head, and the space actually trembled. A wisp of a ferocious smile appeared on the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. He retreated instead of advancing and he stabbed with the spirit elegant sword. A single strike to decide life and death. The sword stabbed directly into the man's palm. Bang! The ground under Yi Xian and the man's feet directly collapsed. Right at this moment, the red snake on the man's arm suddenly flew out at an extremely swift speed. It was even faster than Yi Xian's sword, and it pierced Yi Xian's chest before he could even react. Yi Xian's body stiffened. At this moment an afterimage flashed, and then a leg swept towards Yi Xian's abdomen. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly blasted flying. The red snake had just entered Yi Xian's body and was about to devour his internal organs when it seemed to sense something and vanished. When it appeared again it was within the prison pagoda. When the red snake saw the world prison pagoda, it was first stunned. In the next moment fear appeared in its eyes. It instinctively wanted to escape, but at this moment, a claw suddenly grabbed it. The red snake was terrified to the extreme and its body trembled violently. In the blink of an eye, a piece of paper floated over to the red snake. There was a claw and a large symbol drawn on it. The red snake's eyes were filled with confusion. What does this mean? Another piece of paper floated over to the red snake. It was still a claw and a large symbol. How could the red snake understand this? It immediately shook its head. The claw suddenly exerted force. Bang! The red snake exploded and turned into a bloody mist. Outside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian, who had fallen to the ground, subconsciously trembled, because he could clearly feel everything that was happening inside the prison pagoda. The red snake did not know what the god on the second floor was trying to express, so it disappeared. Thinking about it this way, the god on the second floor was quite nice to him. Yi Xian was shocked by his own thoughts. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian quickly got up. He did not forget that he was now facing 3 monsters. 1 against 3. Could he beat them? It seemed like he could not beat them. Yi Xian turned to look at Lu Banzwang, who was not far away. Lu Banzwang had completely suppressed the middle-aged man. It was obvious that the middle-aged man could not beat Lu Banzwang, but Lu Banzwang would not be able to kill him in a short time either. The woman in green was also being held back by her opponent, and Ling Yu on the other side was the same. Right now no one could help him. Yi Xian took a deep breath. Right now he could only rely on himself. In the distance the man stared at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with horror. How is this possible? How can you be unharmed? That snake was a divine Unity Realm monster that specialized in eating a person's internal organs. It was one of his trump cards. When it entered a person's body, it could instantly devour the person's internal organs. However, when the snake entered Yi Xian's body, he found that he had completely lost contact with the red snake. Yi Xian found it funny. Right now he could activate the prison pagoda to take people in, but he did not dare to. Activating it once would definitely cause a big problem. Moreover, the Sword Immortal Sister had strictly ordered him not to act recklessly. Thus, unless he was in a dire situation, he would not easily activate the prison pagoda. However, he did not expect that the snake would run in by itself. After entering his body, it did not immediately devour his internal organs. Instead, it sensed the prison pagoda and just entered. It was fine if it went in, but it could not understand the scribblings of the god on the second floor. Wasn't this courting death? Actually, he was also drenched in cold sweat. He guessed that the god on the second floor was giving face to the Sword Immortal Sister or the prison pagoda. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. At this moment, the man in gray in front of Yi Xian suddenly spread his legs. Crack! The ground beneath his feet shook violently. Immediately after, his hands slammed into the ground and the metal rings on his hands suddenly sank into the ground. Bang! The ground beneath Yi Xian's feet instantly cracked. A powerful force shot up from the ground. Within this force there were 10 pitch-black metal rings. Each ring was connected to the other and each ring emitted a domineering and powerful force. Sensing the power contained within these metal rings, Yi Xian did not dare to hold back. He held the Spirit Elegant Sword in his left hand and stabbed forward. One sword to determine life and death. This time he used the single stroke determines life and death sword technique again. Although his current body did not allow him to use such a powerful sword technique, he had no other choice. Because if he could not block it, he would die. The sword slashed down. Bang! The black metal rings were instantly shattered by Yi Xian's sword. However, Yi Xian's entire body was thrown backward. At this moment, a golden arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness. It was extremely fast and arrived in front of Yi Xian like a bolt of lightning. Yi Xian opened his eyes abruptly. 2 beams of sword light shot out. However, the power of these 2 beams of sword light was much weaker than before. This was because his body had already been exhausted to a very serious extent. The 2 sword lights collided with the golden arrow. The golden arrow trembled violently, but the 2 sword lights exploded with a loud bang. The golden arrow shot straight in. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly. His sword stabbed the arrowhead and the Spirit Elegant Sword shook violently. However, the arrow was directly shattered by the sword. However, another arrow shot over. It was too fast. Yi Xian forcefully twisted his body and avoided the vital parts. Swoosh! Yi Xian's entire body was instantly smashed more than 100 feet away. A golden arrow was stuck in his shoulder. On the ground, Yi Xian slammed his left hand on the ground and bounced up. At this moment, the man in gray suddenly appeared in front of him. Immediately after, the man in gray kicked him. Yi Xian did not block it. Instead, he forcefully endured the kick with his body. However, the moment he was sent flying, the Spirit Elegant Sword pierced into the thigh of the man in gray. Unfortunately, he did not manage to cut off the man in gray's leg with one strike. Because the moment the sword pierced into the thigh, the man in gray retreated several feet in an instant. Yi Xian himself was once again shaken more than 100 feet away. He had just stood up when a smear of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. It should be said that the blood didn't stop flowing. In the distance, the man in gray and the man in gray suddenly disappeared on the spot at the same time. A hint of savagery appeared at the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. He was just about to risk his life when Ling Han, who was behind him, suddenly stood up. The next moment, Ling Han directly rushed towards the two people. Who the F***ck dares to touch my big brother? Who dares to touch my big brother? Behind Yi Xian, several voices sounded out. P.S. Recently, some people have come to scold me in the book review section. Don't mind them. They're just jealous of my handsomeness, but this can't be helped. Is it wrong that I'm handsome? Is it wrong? A bunch of haters with a heart of jealousy. Sigh, handsome people have many quarrels. Everyone, don't scold those haters. Love the ugly, start with me. Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version. Chapter 154. Besides Ling Han, who'd charged over, Gong Wei, Yi Li, Nan Kaming, and Bai Zhe had stood up as well. The Divine Union Realm. All 5 of them had attained the Divine Union Realm. In next to no time, Bai Zhe and the others charged towards the nearby gray-clothed man and young man. At this moment, Bai Zhe and the others had extremely ferocious expressions on their faces, because they were actually aware of everything that had occurred just now. When they saw Yi Xian being besieged to such a state, it felt like their hearts were being torn apart by blades. However, they had no other choice. They had to charge into the Divine Union Realm, because only at the Divine Union Realm could they fight the gray-clothed man and the others. Otherwise, they would only be giving their lives away. 5 against 3. The gray-clothed man and the others were formidable indeed. Even if it was 3 against 5, they actually didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. After all, they were the most monstrous geniuses of the Central Divine Prefecture's younger generation. Not far away, Yi Xian sat on the ground. He seemed to be a little uncomfortable, so he simply lay on the ground, took out a golden sore pill and swallowed it. He was exhausted. The battle from before was truly too exhausting. He was truly exhausted, because he'd severely overexerted his body. Coupled with the injuries he'd sustained, his body could be said to be on the verge of collapse. At this moment, he didn't even want to move a finger. Right at this moment, a black shadow suddenly assaulted him from the side at an extremely swift speed. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly flashed past behind Yi Xian. This figure was even swifter. Bang! Along with an explosion, an afterimage retreated repeatedly, and it didn't take long for the afterimage to retreat into the darkness. Meanwhile, a man was standing by Yi Xian's side. Mo Yunqi. Mo Yunqi gazed coldly at the darkness in the distance, and he held a golden throwing knife in his palm. Meanwhile, a few more men arrived by Yi Xian's side. At this moment, all the members of the bandit mercenary group had attained the Divine Union Realm, and not a single one of them had failed. Mo Yunqi and the other members of the bandit mercenary group stood on guard by Yi Xian's side. Yi Xian felt extremely exhausted, and he wanted to sleep. This time he didn't force himself to stay awake because Mo Yunqi and the others were by his side. He was at ease. Soon he fell asleep. Mo Yunqi and the others stood guard beside Yi Xian. They stared at the darkness around them, their eyes filled with cold, killing intent. Not far away. Bang! With a muffled sound, a figure was directly sent flying. This figure was the middle-aged man who was fighting Lu Banzwang. This time the middle-aged man flew more than 100 feet, and as soon as he stopped, Lu Banzwang appeared in front of him again. In the blink of an eye, Lu Banzwang leaped into the air and slammed her palm down. When her palm landed, her entire palm became illusory. The palm had not yet arrived, but the momentum had arrived first. The ground beneath the middle-aged man's feet turned to dust. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted abruptly when he sensed the might of this palm strike. He squatted down in a half-squat, crossed his arms and blocked it in front of him. The profound energy within his body surged into his arms like tide water. The palm fell. Bang! The middle-aged man's feet sank into the ground and his arms were torn apart. At this moment, Lu Banzwang landed on the ground and raised his knee to the middle-aged man's chin. Bang! The middle-aged man's throat instantly shattered and fresh blood sprayed. Lu Banzwang gestured with her right hand, and the spatial ring on the middle-aged man's finger flew into her grasp. A wisp of an arc arose on the corners of her mouth when she glanced at its contents. After she put it away, Lu Banzhuang gazed at Lian Zhan, who was fighting the woman in green clothes nearby. In the next moment she suddenly vanished on the spot. Over 30 m away, Lian Zhan, who was fighting the woman in green clothes, suddenly turned around and punched. Bang! Lian Zhan retreated a few dozen steps. Lu Banzhuang appeared by the woman's side. She glanced at Lian Zhan in the distance and was just about to attack when a voice suddenly resounded from the darkness in the distance. Retreat! Retreat! Lian Zhan pondered deeply for a moment, and then he turned around with the intention of leaving. Meanwhile, Lu Banzhuang and the woman in green clothes suddenly vanished on the spot. Lian Zhan's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene, and then he suddenly raised his hands. In an instant 2 balls of strange black gas suddenly condensed on his palms. In the blink of an eye, a wisp of a ferocious smile arose on the corners of his mouth, and then he suddenly slapped his palms forward. The 2 balls of black gas shook violently before they exploded apart. Bang! Lu Banzhuang and the woman in green clothes directly retreated to their original positions, and in front of them floated 2 balls of strange black gas. There was a trace of seriousness in the 2 women's eyes because they felt danger. However, the 2 of them did not have the slightest fear, and in the blink of an eye, they once again disappeared on the spot. In the distance, Lian Zhan's eyes narrowed slightly. He stretched out his right hand and then suddenly clenched it. Break! His voice fell. In the distance, the 2 balls of black gas exploded with a loud bang. When Lu Banzhuang and the woman in green clothes swept away the black gas, Lian Zhan had already disappeared, and on the other side the man in grey clothes and the others had also disappeared. Lu Banzhuang and the woman in green clothes rushed forward, but in the next moment the 2 women suddenly stopped. The 2 women looked at each other and it was unknown what they felt, but there was a trace of shock in their eyes. Ling Han and the others came to the 2 women's side and Ling Han said in a low voice, "Do we chase?" The 2 women shook their heads at the same time. Ling Han still wanted to say something, but Lu Banzhuang looked at Zhou Xian, who was lying on the ground not far away. Wait for him to recover. Hearing this, Ling Han nodded and then came to Zhou Xian's side with Gong Wuwei and the others. They did not wake Zhou Xian and instead stood around Zhou Xian just like that. In the distance, the woman in green clothes said in a low voice, "This matter is not simple." Lu Banzhuang fell silent. The woman in green clothes looked at Lu Banzhuang, her expression quite serious. That aura. The Middle Divine Continent's Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm are not risking their lives, but risking their lives. Even if he has a sword immortal behind him, he cannot afford to play with them. Those 2 forces have existed in the Middle Divine Continent for thousands of years, and their resources are very deep. They are not something that a sword immortal can easily contend with. Moreover, they have come looking for him. You should know very well yourself. Lu Banzhuang did not speak. The woman in green clothes frowned. Are you really going to continue getting involved in this mess? Lu Banzhuang still did not speak. The woman in green clothes said slightly angrily, "How long have you known him? Do you really want to leave your life in Azure Province? And the Lu clan, even if you don't think for yourself, you should at least think for the Lu clan, right? If they are dragged into this, do you think it is a good thing for the Lu clan?" Lu Banzhuang shook his head slightly and then walked in front of Zhou Xian. He looked at Zhou Xian, who was lying in front of him, expressionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. Beside him, the woman in green clothes was so angry that she suddenly stomped on the ground. Everyone was dumbfounded by this sight. In next to no time, the horizon was suffused with a smear of dawn. The sky was bright. Meanwhile, Zhou Xian still did not wake up. It was not until noon that he slowly opened his eyes. When he saw that Ling Han and the others were still there, he grinned. "You're all here." Ling Han and the others also smiled. It was good that he was fine. Zhou Xian slowly stood up. He glanced at Ling Han and the others. At this moment, Ling Han and the others were already in the Divine Unity tier. Seeing that his brothers had all reached the Divine Unity tier, he was naturally happy. As for himself, he could actually start searching for spirit swords. However, he could only devour clear grade swords now. A sword at the level of a superb spiritual sword would definitely not have a good effect on him. As for clear grade swords, they were worth at least hundreds of millions of gold coins, and they were the kind that had a price but no supply. Poor. Zhou Xian sighed in his heart. He was not just poor. At this moment, the 5th floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn appeared not far from Zhou Xian and the others. The The fifth-floor master glanced at Yi Xian and wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian said softly, "Senior, do you have something to say?" The fifth-floor master nodded and his expression was rather unnatural. "Young friend, just now, the drunken immortal and suddenly recalled the Dao soldiers that had rushed over. Something might have happened." Hearing this, Yi Xian frowned. "Do you know the reason?" The fifth-floor master shook his head. "I don't know the specific reason, but there must have been two voices at the headquarters. If I'm not wrong, it should be Kuraki Academy and Dark Realm doing something." Yi Xian's frown deepened. The drunken immortal Inn had always been supporting him, but now there were two voices within the drunken immortal Inn. What exactly did Kuraki Academy and Dark Realm do? The fifth-floor master said in a low voice, "Young friend, don't worry. The drunken immortal Inn has already decided to support you, and it will absolutely not change its mind under normal circumstances. I'll get to the bottom of this matter as soon as possible." Yi Xian nodded. "All right. There's one more thing. I hope that Senior can help me find a sword. It would be best if it's a clear-grade sword, just one will do." His current wealth was only enough to buy one and he truly couldn't afford any more. Even though he had quite a bit of money, his expenses were quite high as well. Especially for Tsonglan Academy. Tsonglan Academy hadn't completely gotten on the right track, and it had no source of income. If he couldn't produce the money, then the students of Tsonglan Academy would probably have to starve. A clear-grade sword. The fifth-floor master thought for a moment and said, "All right, I'll immediately notify the headquarters and the Azure Prefecture's Kuraki Academy to find a clear-grade sword for you as soon as possible." He paused slightly at this point and then he continued, "Her Highness has already rushed to the southern border of the state of Jiang. However, the soldiers she brought over will probably be unable to resist the state of Yu and the state of Chu because the Great Cloud Empire is definitely supporting those two states. Young friend, it's best for you to hurry to the southern border immediately so that nothing happens to the ninth princess." The Great Cloud Empire. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Has the Great Cloud Empire sent troops over?" The fifth-floor master replied, "I don't know for now. However, you must be careful. The Great Cloud Empire has a history of almost 3,000 years in Azure Prefecture, and its resources are so deep that they aren't inferior to some powers in the Central Divine region at all." Yi Xian nodded. He fell silent for a moment and then he looked at Ling Yu and the others. "Do you need to rest?" All of them shook their heads. Yi Xian looked at Lu Banzwang and Lu Banzwang whistled. Soon, a dozen black wolves rushed out of Two Realm City and stopped in front of Yi Xian and the others. Yi Xian and the others leaped onto the backs of the wolves. Yi Xian faced the fifth-floor master. "Senior, there are 30 demonic beasts in the city. Please bring them to the Azure Tide Academy." The fifth-floor master nodded. "All right." Yi Xian then turned to Bai Zhe, who was not far away. "Go back with Senior. Remember to restrain these demonic beasts and the students of the academy. If anyone dares to cause trouble for me, I'll come back and break their legs." With that, he led the others and rushed out. In the blink of an eye, the group disappeared into the distance. Ling Yu also followed, but the green-robed woman did not. Looking at Yi Xian and the others in the distance, the green-robed woman sighed softly. "The so-called Brotherhood will kill you." Not far away, Bai Zhe looked coldly at the green-robed woman. "I can die for Bandit Yi and the others at any time. What is Brotherhood? If we can't live and die together, how can we call each other brothers?" With that, he turned and left. Chapter 155. Brothers. The green-robed woman was expressionless and said nothing. She naturally knew what brotherly love was because she also had friends such as Lu Banzwang. If not for Lu Banzwang, she would not have rushed here from the central divine continent. However, brotherly love was not the only thing in this world. The green-robed woman raised her head and looked into the distance, a complicated look in her eyes. She was naturally worried for Lu Banzwang, because she realized that this matter was no longer just a battle between the younger generation. In the central divine continent, the battles between the younger generation would be controlled within a certain range, or they would not interfere, allowing the younger generation to fight and charge their own way. But now, Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm were not being controlled, and not only were they not being controlled, but they were also trying to kill each other. This was not targeted at Yi Xian. This was targeted at Yi Xian and his disciple. This was no longer a battle but a battle to the death. A battle to the death between two great forces was relatively rare in the central divine continent, because the implications were too great. It had to be known that forces of this level would definitely have allies, and once a battle to the death, it was very likely that several forces would be involved. And Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm had existed in the central divine continent for thousands of years, so how deep their foundations were. Once such forces fought to the death, how terrifying would it be? Could a single sword immortal stop them? Even two sword immortals might not be able to. After all, being a sword immortal did not mean being invincible. The green-robed woman sighed softly and then followed them. She was not doing this for Zhou Xian but for Lu Banzhuang. Since persuasion was useless, she could only help. On a plain, Zhou Xian and the others were sprinting. Although Zhou Xian and Lu Banzhuang had not reached the divine combination tier, their strength could be said to have far surpassed it. Reinforcements. The southern side of the Jiang nation had already fallen, and the Great Cloud Empire was definitely involved. Under such circumstances, even if Jiang Jiao went, he would not be of much use. He had to reach Jiang Jiao's side as soon as possible. And now Ling Han and the others were already at the divine reunion tier, and added with their top-grade equipment, if the 11 of them entered the battlefield, they would be like a sharp sword that could pierce a bloody path through tens of thousands of soldiers. Ning Nation. Tuoba Yen stood on a city wall. She wore a tight-fitting dragon robe with her right hand behind her back. Her long hair draped over her shoulders as she looked ahead. At this time an old woman appeared by her side. The old lady bowed slightly to Tuoba Yen. Your Majesty, we found out that Great Cloud Empire has indeed made a move. There are soldiers of Great Cloud Empire in the armies of Chu and Yu. Tuoba Yen narrowed his eyes. Is it the Black Flame Army? The old woman shook her head. I'm not sure. Tuoba Yen slowly closed his eyes. Have the Golden Guards in the shadows get ready. The old woman looked up at Tuoba Yen and said in shock, Your Majesty. Tuoba Yen opened her eyes and looked at the distant horizon. A moment later she softly said, Without the lips, the teeth will be cold. Country of Jiang, Drunken Immortal Inn. In the room, the 5th floor master sat beside him. In front of him was the 8th floor master. Other than them, there was also an old man. The old man sat in the main seat. This person was the 4th floor master of the Drunken Immortal restaurant who had rushed over from the headquarters. An expert above the 10,000 laws realm. On the 4th floor, he took a sip of tea and said softly, We should stop now. Stop now. The 5th floor master frowned. Is this the headquarters decision? The 4th floor master nodded. It's the decision of everyone. The 5th floor master shook his head. I don't understand. Our Drunken Immortal Inn has been supporting little friend Zhou Xian since the beginning, and we've offended Drunken Immortal Inn and Kuraki Academy because of this. If we stop now, the gains don't make up for the losses. The 8th floor master also nodded. Indeed. Since we've already supported him, why not do it to the end? The 4th floor master glanced at the two of them. You might not know this, but this time Kuraki Academy and Dark World have applied for the life and death writ from the Guardians. The Tao Protectors have already agreed. The life and death writ. Hearing this, the 8th floor master and 5th floor master's expressions changed. In the divine central continent, two factions could not casually start a war. It was possible to start a war, but they had to apply for the life and death writ. Once they applied for the life and death writ, it would be a fight to the death. To put it bluntly, Kuraki Academy and Dark World could start an all-out war at any time. In the past they could not start an all-out war at will, but now they could suddenly attack any faction. This was no longer a matter that concerned the younger generation. The 4th floor master said softly, They aren't just targeting Zhou Xian this time, and they're targeting that sword immortal who stands behind him as well. If our Drunken Immortal Inn intends to continue participating, then we must prepare for an all-out war. If we really fight to the death, then our Drunken Immortal Inn will have no advantage at all, and we can't do that. The 5th floor master and 8th floor master fell silent when they heard this. An all-out war. To put it in simpler terms, if they were to fight now, then it wouldn't just be those below the Dharma realm. All of them might have to participate in the war, and it was even to the extent that experts above the Dharma realm might have to participate as well. If they fought like that, then many would die. The Drunken Immortal Inn didn't want to fight like that because the losses would be too great. A short while later, the 4th floor master sighed lightly. Pulling one hair will affect everything. The drunken immortal can't fight like that. Because once we do, then it won't just be a severe injury, it's very likely that we'll lose our lives. Of course, we should help him if it's within our ability. For example, if he needs to buy something, sell something, or even provide information. However, we can't send our forces to fight the Dark Dimension and Kuraki Academy head-on. When he spoke up to this point, he gazed at the fifth-floor master and said, "Once we're done here, return to the Central Divine Prefecture with me and focus on breaking through to the Dharma realm." The fifth-floor master fell silent for a short while before he said, "He needs a light-rank sword." The fourth-floor master nodded slightly. "All right, I'll immediately send someone to search for one for him." As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and walked towards the outside. But when he arrived at the door, he stopped once more. "Remember, don't mix it with too much personal feelings. All of you represent the immortal indulgence inn, and the slightest bit of carelessness will bring calamity to our inn." As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished through the door. In the room, the fifth-floor master smiled bitterly. The eighth-floor master spoke softly, "That's all that my drunken immortal inn can do." The fifth-floor master nodded. "I naturally understand. Alas, I just never imagined that the Dark Dimension and Kuraki Academy would actually be so determined." The eighth-floor master said, "Zhou Xian is truly too much of a monstrous genius. Most importantly, he has a sword immortal backing him. The Dark Dimension and Kuraki Academy are too fearful of him, and they don't dare to allow Zhou Xian to grow at all. Moreover, their actions are equivalent to cutting off all other paths of escape for Zhou Xian." The fifth-floor master gazed at the eighth-floor master, and the latter spoke softly, "There's probably another reason why the Dark Dimension and Kuraki Academy are so resolute, and it's because they're afraid that Zhou Xian will head to the Central Divine Prefecture and join another power like the Azure Wave Academy. If Zhou Xian really joins a power at that time, then Kuraki Academy wouldn't just be targeting a sword immortal. But now that Kuraki Academy and the Dark Dimension have made their stand clear, those powers in the Central Divine Prefecture will naturally not accept Zhou Xian at a time like this." The fifth-floor master sighed softly. Not to mention the other powers, even the Pavilion of Drunken Immortals wouldn't dare protect Zhou Xian. Because if they did, then they would have to be prepared to fight to the death with Kuraki Academy and the Dark Dimension. A short while later, the fifth-floor master stood up. "I'll help as much as I can." With that, he turned around and vanished on the spot. At the southern border of the state of Jiang, Mizar City, Jiangjiu stood on the city wall and gazed ahead. There was a dense mass of cavalry at the end of the horizon. The Chu Kingdom's cavalry. There were over 100,000 of them. It could be said that the Chu Kingdom's cavalry had been mobilized. Besides that, there were some infantrymen around the cavalry. They were the infantry that would attack the city. There were around 100,000 soldiers in Mizar City as well, and they were waiting to be attacked. Naturally, they had many advantages. However, the expressions of everyone on the city wall were extremely solemn. Because the experts of the Great Cloud Empire of Azure Prefecture might be hidden amongst the cavalry in the distance. The Great Cloud Empire. The supreme overlord of Azure Prefecture. The most terrifying thing was that the empire had a mysterious and formidable army, the Black Flame Army. That army of less than 100 had destroyed an entire empire. How terrifying was that? Everyone was afraid of the Great Cloud Empire. But now, everyone in the state of Jiang had no choice but to fight. If they didn't fight, they would be beaten to death. Jiangjiu suddenly turned to look at a deputy general beside her. "How's the situation in the east?" The deputy general said in a deep voice, "Old Marshal Lin Shao has defended the area, but the situation is not good. There are some Divine Unity Realm experts among the Yu Kingdom soldiers, and there are quite a number of them. These people are extremely powerful and ordinary soldiers can't stop them." After Marshal Pei Xiao who rushed over, the situation improved a little, but he only dares to defend and doesn't dare to attack. It's very passive. Jiangjiu nodded slightly, "Understood." At this moment, the cavalry in the distance suddenly moved. Everyone on the city wall quickly raised their heads. In front of the Chu Kingdom's cavalry was a group of infantry sieging the city. There were about 20,000 of them, and there were thousands of them. These people were not soldiers but civilians. The civilians of the state of Jiang. Among them there were old people, women, and children. Seeing this scene, Jiangjiu's expression instantly turned ugly. At this moment, the soldiers on the city wall also had extremely ugly expressions. Soon, the Chu Kingdom's soldiers forced the civilians to approach the city. When the civilians saw the soldiers of Jiang Kingdom, they immediately ran towards the city as if they had gone mad. Without a doubt, this was their last straw to clutch at. When they saw the scene, the soldiers on the city wall looked at Zhang Jiu. The civilians were getting closer and closer, and behind them were the Chu Kingdom's sieging soldiers. Once the civilians got close, the sieging soldiers would seize the opportunity to break through the city gate. At that time, countless people in Mizar City would die. Not only Mizar City, but the Chu Kingdom's cavalry could even go all the way south to the imperial capital of Jiang Kingdom. The civilians were getting closer and closer to the Chu Kingdom's soldiers. At this moment, Zhang Jiu suddenly took a step forward with an expressionless face. Release the arrows. Chapter 156. Release the arrows. When she shouted these two words, Zhang Jiu was still expressionless. Acting on her emotions? How could she act on her emotions? If the Chu soldiers broke into the city, countless soldiers in the city would die. Not only would the soldiers die, but the citizens in the city would also fall under the butcher knives of the Chu soldiers. More people would die. She had to be responsible for more people. Although it was cruel, she had no other choice. She had no other choice. Zhang Jiu stared at the Chu soldiers below. Her eyes were bloodshot and emotionless. On the city wall, the soldiers looked at the citizens of the Jiang country. They could not bear to see them. These were the citizens of the Jiang country. However, they had no choice but to act. Helplessness. Deep helplessness. Just as the soldiers on the city wall were about to act, a deputy general beside Zhang Jiu suddenly pointed to the right. Marshal, look. Zhang Jiu turned to look to the right. There 12 people riding black wolves were charging over. Yi Xian. Seeing that it was Yi Xian, the people on the city wall were in an uproar. State Scholar Yi. Someone suddenly shouted angrily. Very quickly, voices resounded from the city wall. State Scholar Yi. The sound of the city wall and the shouts pierced through the clouds. The moment she saw Yi Xian, Zhang Jiu's expression instantly relaxed. Her tightly clenched fists loosened and fresh blood dripped from her palms. In the distance, Yi Xian and the others were riding the big black wolves towards the Chu soldiers attacking the city. 10 Divine Union Realm experts, in addition to Yi Xian and Lu Banzwang, who far surpassed the Divine Union Realm. How terrifying was the aura of Yi Xian's group. Although there were only 12 of them, their aura was not inferior to a small army. Yi Xian's group was extremely fast. In a short period of time, they had already charged in front of the group of soldiers. The cavalry behind the Chu soldiers did not even have time to react. This was because Yi Xian's group was simply too fast. Kill. The leader Yi Xian roared angrily. A sword flew out from Yi Xian's body. The spirit-elegant sword was like a bolt of lightning as it pierced through the distance. In an instant, more than 10 heads flew. Kill. Behind Yi Xian, Ling Han and the others roared in anger. Unstoppable. When Yi Xian and the others rushed into the group of soldiers, they immediately started a massacre. Those soldiers were simply not their opponents. Of course, because they didn't react in time and didn't organize well, Yi Xian and the others were caught unprepared. At this moment, Zhang Jiu, who was on the city wall, suddenly shouted, "Open the city gates." Below, the city gate was opened, and the citizens of the state of Jiang immediately rushed into the city, while countless soldiers rushed out of the city. Don't panic. Among the Chu Kingdom's infantry, a middle-aged general suddenly roared, "Form groups of 5 immediately." Meanwhile, a ray of light suddenly flashed and then it pierced through the center of the general's forehead, causing his voice to stop abruptly. Not only that, but some of the generals in the infantry had also fallen. To catch bandits, first capture the ringleader. The sleeping commanders were killed one after another, and the Chu soldiers were instantly thrown into chaos. Flee. Countless soldiers fled into the distance, and Yi Xian's group and Zhang Jiu naturally wouldn't let such an opportunity slip by. Immediately, Yi Xian and the others led the charge, and everywhere they passed, corpses were left behind. Ordinary soldiers couldn't stop them at all. Just like that, the group of Chu Kingdom's infantry continued to flee, while Yi Xian and the others madly pursued them. In the distance, the middle-aged man in the lead of the group of Chu Kingdom's cavalry suddenly raised the sword in his hand. Kill. Almost 100,000 cavalrymen suddenly roared in anger, and in the blink of an eye 100,000 cavalrymen directly charged out. For a time, the entire ground shook violently as if there was a great earthquake. 100,000 cavalrymen charging in unison, how terrifying was that? Yi Xian suddenly stopped, and the moment he stopped, Ling Han and the others stopped as well. Jiang Jiu arrived by his side and said, "Retreat." Yi Xian nodded and said, "Retreat." It wasn't long before Yi Xian's group and the soldiers of the state of Jiang retreated, and it wasn't long before they all retreated into the city. Meanwhile, the Chu Kingdom's cavalrymen outside the city had stopped as well. Cavalrymen naturally couldn't attack the city. Above and below the city walls, the two armies faced each other. Below the city walls, in front of the cavalrymen, a middle-aged man slowly rode his horse to a place not far from the city walls. He raised his head to look at Yi Xian, who was on the city walls, and asked, "You are state scholar Yi of the state of Jiang?" Beside Yi Xian, Jiang Jiu said softly, "This person is the marshal of the Chu Kingdom's cavalry, Xianxia, and he is at the peak stage of the divine combination tier." Yi Xian nodded slightly and looked down. "Do you have any advice for me?" Xianxia said calmly, "I have long heard that you are the most monstrous genius of the state of Jiang after Lanxiu. Today I would like to exchange a few moves with you." Hearing this, Jiang Jiu, who was beside Yi Xian, frowned and said, "It's a trap. He is the marshal of an army, so under normal circumstances he wouldn't come alone to take such a risk." At this time, the countless soldiers of the state of Jiang on the city walls suddenly shouted in unison, "Fight! Fight!" Tens of thousands of soldiers roared in unison, their voices deafening like thunder. Countless soldiers looked at Yi Xian excitedly. In the state of Jiang, Yi Xian's prestige was undoubtedly extremely high, to the point that it was ridiculously high. And among the citizens and soldiers of the state of Jiang, Yi Xian was invincible. The swordsman of the state of Jiang. Everyone felt an indescribable sense of confidence and anticipation towards Yi Xian. Seeing the excited and worshipful gazes of the surrounding soldiers, Jiang Jiu's face sank. If they didn't fight now, it would undoubtedly be a blow to their morale, but if they fought, she had a new worry. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "It's fine." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly leaped up and slashed his sword down towards Xianxia. Seeing Yi Xian jump down, Xianxia's mouth curled into a cold smile. He held his sword with both hands and soared into the sky, and similarly slashed his sword towards Yi Xian. Both of them had their own plans. Just like that, under the gazes of countless people, their swords were about to collide, and right at the instant that their swords were about to collide, Yi Xian suddenly changed the trajectory of his sword and stabbed it towards Xianxia's throat. A wisp of a savage smile appeared on the corners of Xianxia's mouth when he saw this. He actually didn't withdraw his sword, and he stabbed it towards Yi Xian's heart instead. A life for a life. Right when Yi Xian's sword was half an inch away from Xianxia's throat, Xianxia suddenly held tightly onto Yi Xian's sword with his left hand. At the same time, his sword stabbed directly into Yi Xian's abdomen where his heart was. When his sword stabbed into Yi Xian's body, Xianxia was instantly stunned. It was slightly unreal. Is Yi Xian that easy to kill? Right at this moment, the sword in his hand suddenly transformed into countless strands of energy that entered Yi Xian's body. Xianxia's expression changed drastically when he noticed this, and he was about to retreat when Yi Xian's sword suddenly spun. Xianxia's entire arm instantly shattered. Yi Xian's sword pierced straight through, aiming straight for Xianxia's head. However, right at this moment there was a sudden change. 3 strange black-robed men suddenly appeared behind Xianxia. They appeared without any warning. In the blink of an eye, a cold flash blocked Yi Xian's sword, while the other 2 cold flashes sliced towards Yi Xian's throat at an extremely fast speed. Extremely fast. However, Yi Xian was already mentally prepared. The instant the 3 black-robed men appeared, he suddenly withdrew his sword and retreated several meters. At this moment, Ling Han and the others leaped down the city wall and arrived beside Yi Xian. 12 peak stage Divine Unity tier elites. Opposite Yi Xian and the others, after the 3 black-robed men failed in their first attack, they didn't continue to attack, and instead mysteriously disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian's right hand gripped the spirit elegant sword tightly, and he was just about to continue attacking when a white-robed old man suddenly appeared in front of him. Middle-earth Divine Continent Warehouse, the guardian of the Academy of Wood. The white-robed old man glanced at Zhou Xian and the others. He didn't speak and instead turned to look to the side. At this moment, a middle-aged man walked out from there. When they saw this middle-aged man, Ling Han and Ling Yu were immediately stunned. Because this person was the patriarch of their Ling clan, Ling Tian. Ling Tian glanced at Ling Han and his brother. Return to the central divine continent. Ling Han said gravely, Patriarch, what are you doing? Ling Tian shook his head. The Ling clan will not participate in this matter. The two of you immediately return to the central divine continent with me. Ling Han's expression turned cold. No. Ling Tian said angrily, there are 2,700 people in the Ling clan. Do you want the entire clan to die with you? Ling Han clenched his fists tightly. At this moment the sound transmission stones on Yi Li and the others all sounded, including Lu Banzwang. Everyone exchanged a look and soon the expressions of Yi Li gone away, and the others became extremely ugly. Zhou Xian asked softly, what is it? Yi Li said gravely, something has happened to the clan. Tell me to return immediately. Ganwei looked at Zhou Xian and said, me too. The others all nodded. Zhou Xian fell silent. Nearby, the white-robed elder glanced at Ling Han and the others and said, it's not that our Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm don't have the ability to kill you. We just don't want to fight to the death with the forces behind you. If you retreat, the grudges between our Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm with you will be written off. If you don't retreat, then our Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm will fight to the death with your clans. Yi Li and the others' expressions became extremely ugly when they heard this. Their clans added together weren't weak, especially the Lu clan, which was a powerful clan of the current era. However, their clans wouldn't allow them to fight to the death with Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm for the sake of Zhou Xian. It wasn't worth it. The sound transmission stones in the arms of Yi Li and the others continued to ring. Beside the white-robed elder, Ling Tian suddenly sighed softly and said, you value your brothers, but what about your clans? Even if you don't value your clans, what about your parents? They gave birth to you and raised you, so do you not value them? Do you know how many people you're going to kill with this choice of yours? Ling Han clenched his fists tightly, his expression livid. Around him, Yi Li and the others were the same. Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm were no longer targeting the younger generation. They were going to start a war, an all-out war. If they wanted to fight, then all the elites of the 10,000 Dharma tier and above would be mobilized. And the clans behind Ling Han and the others couldn't possibly start an all-out war with Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm. It really wasn't worth it. Moreover, if they fought, they could easily be wiped out. Right at this moment, Zhou Xian suddenly asked softly, what do you think brothers are? Everyone turned to look at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian smiled and said, understood. If brothers can't understand each other, then they aren't brothers but rather selfish. As he said this, he turned to Ling Han and the others and said, now as the eldest brother, I order you to immediately return to your respective clans, and then wait for me in the central divine continent. Wait for me to come find you. Believe me, there will be a day when we brothers will meet again. Brothers. In Zhou Xian's eyes, brothers should not only go through trials and tribulations, share prosperity and live and die together, but they should also understand each other. Understand? If they couldn't understand each other, then that would be selfish. It was like asking a brother to borrow money. The brother himself couldn't even feed himself, yet you still wanted to borrow money from him. How could this be called brothers? No. This was selfishness, this was acting selfishly in the name of brothers. Zhou Xian was a selfish person, but he would never be selfish to his own people. P.S. I recommend a book from my good friend Chongning Imperial Army. It's a very good book, everyone can read it. Finally, please subscribe. Subscription monthly ticket, decide whether I eat chicken drumsticks or instant noodles this month. Please support me on my knees. Friends from other websites can also come to Zongheng Chinese Network to support me. Genius 1 second remember website address. Mobile version. Chapter 157. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Ling Han and the others were all looking at Zhou Xian, and at this moment their eyes were already slightly red. They would stay and advance and retreat with Zhou Xian. This was naturally what they were thinking. However, what about their clans? They were in a dilemma of loyalty and filial piety. At this moment Yi Xian walked up to Ling Han, patted his shoulder lightly and said with a smile, "If you go back, are we not brothers? No, even if you don't stay here, we are still brothers who will live and die together. You understand me just like I understand you." After saying this, he turned to Yi Li and the others and said, "Your actions have already brought danger to your clans. Protect your clans, this is also your responsibility. In this world there are not only brothers and friends but also relatives. All of you go back and wait for me to come to the central divine continent to find you." Ling Han shook his head, his eyes slightly red, and said, "Big brother, if we leave, what will you do?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Don't worry. I still have some trump cards, it won't be a problem." None of Ling Han and the others left and they just stood there. At this moment, the eyes of these 7-foot-tall men were red, and there were tears in their eyes. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly looked at the nearby Lu Banzwang. Lu Banzwang hadn't said a word since the beginning. Yi Xian walked up to Lu Banzwang and Lu Banzwang glanced at him, still saying nothing. Yi Xian said softly, "Take them back and wait for me to come to the central divine continent." Lu Banzwang fell silent. Yi Xian said, "They should shoulder their own responsibilities and there is still time, we can wait for the future. Take them away and live well in the central divine continent. Don't weaken the reputation of our bandit army." Lu Banzwang looked at Yi Xian for a long time and finally said softly, "I can't not go back. If I don't, the Kuraki Academy and the Dark Realm will declare war on the Lu clan, and many people in the clan will die." At this point her eyes suddenly became wet and she said, "But if we go back, who will help you? Who will help you?" Hearing Lu Banzwang's words, Ling Han and the others suddenly felt their noses sting. Who is going to help Yi Xian? The Kuraki Academy and Dark World were clearly using their strength to bully others. Yi Xian was alone, and they were only barely able to resist them because of their presence. Now, if they were to leave, Yi Xian's situation would undoubtedly become even more difficult. Yi Xian smiled. "Do you still remember Shang Yu's words?" Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "I'm a stubborn person. I can't stand being bullied and I don't like to compromise. If anyone bullies me, I'll definitely bully them back. Even if I can't beat them, as long as they bully me, I won't tolerate it. I won't back down." At this point he smiled faintly and continued, "My temper is just like that. It couldn't be changed. If one day I'm beaten to death because of this, then I, Yi Xian, deserve it. I'm not strong enough, so I don't blame anyone. After you return, cultivate well. I promise you I'll definitely come to the central divine continent to find you. At that time I hope you'll still recognize me as your big brother." "Big brother." Ling Han looked straight at Yi Xian and said, "Big brother Yi, you'll always be our big brother, always. And there will only be one big brother in the bandit mercenary group." Yi Li nodded. "Big brother once, big brother forever." The other members of the bandit mercenary group also nodded. Yi Xian smiled faintly and said, "We'll meet again someday." After saying this, he looked at Lu Banzwang and said, "You're the big sister, so you should have the demeanor of a big sister." Lu Banzwang glanced at Yi Xian and then turned to walk toward the nearby black wolf. "Everyone immediately follow me." Ling Han looked straight at Yi Xian and said, "Big brother, the central divine continent will wait for you. Big brother, the central divine continent will wait for you. Big brother will wait for you. Big brother, my name is Lin Yunxian. This chapter is not the end, please continue." But I don't know how to speak. In any case, the central divine continent will wait for you. Big brother, you have to stay alive, you have to promise me. Big brother, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. My father threatened me with death. Big brother, I really want to stay, really. Not long after, Lu Banzwang and the others disappeared on the black wolf. In the distance, Lu Banzwang was expressionless, and beside her, Ling Han and the others' faces were already covered in tears. Stay. Everyone wanted to stay. However, there was nothing they could do. At this time, Ling Han suddenly roared, "When I return, I'll definitely become the patriarch, the patriarch." Yi Li nodded slightly. "I also want to be the patriarch." Everyone nodded. If they were the patriarchs, they would have the right to speak and could make decisions and even mobilize the powerful forces of the clan. Only by becoming stronger would they have the right to speak and the ability to control their own fate. Below Mizar City. Only when Yi Li and the others had completely disappeared in the distance did Yi Xian turn around. They'd all left. In truth, he was a little reluctant. because he really had feelings for them. Fighting together with a group of brothers, this kind of feeling was actually very good. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. He could not selfishly leave Ling Han and the others here, as this would harm their families. Just like Shang Yu, that youth wanted to live, really wanted to live, but in order not to drag everyone down, he decisively chose to commit suicide. At this time, Jiang Jiu suddenly walked to Yi Xian's side. Jiang Jiu said softly, "Me too." Nearby Mo Yunqi snickered. "Jiang Jiu. Mo Yunqi." Yi Xian laughed loudly, his laughter like thunder, shaking the horizon. Nearby, the white-robed elder suddenly said, "Yi Xian, you can also be considered a talent. Those arrogant and unruly geniuses of the divine middle continent are willing to recognize you as their big brother, and are even willing to risk their lives for you. Unfortunately, this is of no use. Let me tell you, just like how the headmaster of Jiang Country's Kuraki Academy, Li Xuanzong, said, not joining our Kuraki Academy is the greatest loss of your life." Yi Xian shook his head with a smile and said, "Don't say any more nonsense. Just be frank about how you want to fight." The white-robed old man nodded slightly, "As you wish." As soon as he finished speaking, he moved to the side. Meanwhile, a man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian recognized the man. It was the gray-clothed man who'd fought him that day. The gray-clothed man's arms were covered in black iron hoops. Yi Xian smiled. "It seems like it isn't enough." The gray-clothed man's eyes instantly narrowed when he heard Yi Xian. A moment later, he suddenly stomped his right foot against the ground, and he instantly appeared in front of Yi Xian. After that, he smashed his arms down towards Yi Xian. At this moment, the black iron hoops on his arms started to revolve violently and emanated strands of fierce energy. Yi Xian's face was emotionless as he raised his hand and stabbed. Bang! The gray-clothed man was instantly blasted over 30 m back. As soon as he stopped moving, the ground beneath his feet instantly cracked apart, and his hands were trembling incessantly. Yi Xian walked towards the gray-clothed man with his sword in hand, and a wisp of ridicule arose on the corners of his mouth. "Is that all the monstrous geniuses of the Central Divine Prefecture are like this?" The gray-clothed man's expression instantly became ferocious when he heard this. Meanwhile, the white-robed old man spoke abruptly, "Every single strike of his sword is filled with his full strength. You'll definitely suffer a loss if you hold back in the slightest." The gray-clothed man clenched his fists tightly again. "This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page." He squatted down in a half-squat. Crack! In an instant, the ground in an area of over 100 m cracked apart. At the same time, a formidable aura suddenly surged out from within him, and it pressed down towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not stop. He continued to walk forward, and his body was also emitting a powerful aura. His sword aura. He walked towards the gray-clothed man, and it didn't take long for his sword aura to collide with the gray-clothed man's aura. Bang! The ground around them trembled violently. Yi Xian stopped moving, but it didn't take long for him to continue forward. The gray-clothed man's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. He'd underestimated Yi Xian's sword aura. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly sped up and his speed was growing faster and faster. He just charged towards the gray-clothed man with his sword in hand. Moreover, his aura was growing stronger and stronger. In the end, it was like a torrent that seemed capable of destroying everything. A single strike of the sword would decide life and death. The white-robed old man's expression changed when he witnessed this scene. It was aura. Regardless of whether it was the cultivation of the martial arts or the sword, both of them condensed aura, and intent came after aura. Aura came before intent. Many people felt that intent was more important than aura. However, it wasn't. Aura could be said to be as important as intent, because aura could be gathered and borrowed. At this moment, Yi Xian had faintly started to borrow aura. At this moment, not far away, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. The white-robed old man heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. Obviously, Yi Xian hadn't comprehended this point. Borrowing aura wasn't something that could be understood just by talking about it, but one had to comprehend it himself. If one could comprehend it, then one could borrow it. If one couldn't, then one couldn't borrow it. Earlier, Yi Xian clearly had the aura to comprehend it, but now that aura was gone. However, at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly frowned and said softly, "Aura? My battle intent and sword intent confuse into this sword aura, but what about the others?" "Others?" As he spoke, he held the sword in his right hand and spun it lightly. In an instant, a light breeze was stirred into a vortex by the sword, and soon the light breeze fused into his sword. Zhou Xian was overjoyed when he had seen that. It was really possible. On the other side, the white-robed old man suddenly roared furiously, "Kill him! Kill him!" At this moment, the white-robed old man's eyes were filled with shock. Because once Zhou Xian really comprehended the true profundities of aura, it meant that he might advance from a grandmaster of the sword to a sword master. He could use the sword to control the wind, the sword to control the earth, and the sword to control everything in the world. Sword master. When he thought of this, the white-robed old man was exasperated. Attack together. Attack together. As soon as the white-robed old man spoke, a few more people suddenly appeared. It was Li Mulin who had stalled Ling Yu earlier, an archer with a longbow on his back and a one-armed man. Zhou Xian was familiar with this man as well. The red figure on the second floor belonged to this one-armed man. 3 monstrous geniuses on the monstrous genius rankings and a middle-aged man. Other than that, there were also 6 ghost-like shadowy figures that quietly appeared around Zhou Xian. These 6 people immediately surrounded Zhou Xian. Elite Dao soldiers from the Dark World. Just how terrifying was this lineup? Naturally, Zhou Xian could not continue comprehending at a time like this. Although it was a pity to lose this opportunity, he had no other choice. Just as he was about to exit that mysterious state, a jade-white hand suddenly landed lightly on his shoulder. Immediately after, a voice rang out in his ear. "Continue. I'll deal with them." Hearing this voice, Zhou Xian was stunned. End of this chapter. Chapter 158. What a familiar voice. A voice I haven't heard in a long time. Xianxia. When he heard this voice, even Zhou Xian himself was stunned. Because he'd truly never imagined that Xianxia would actually make an appearance here at this critical moment. Xianxia was standing before Zhou Xian. She still wore a white dress that wasn't tainted by a speck of dust, and she was still so beautiful to the point it was suffocating. Xianxia was once the most monstrous genius in the state of Jiang. What's she doing here? Zhou Xian didn't think about this because he had more important things to do now. Comprehension. At most times one had to grasp inspiration as soon as it arrived. Otherwise, once it vanished, then one wouldn't know when it would come again. This time inspiration had suddenly appeared and he'd entered such a state. It was undoubtedly a heaven-sent opportunity to him. I can't miss it. In next to no time Zhou Xian calmed his heart down completely. Xianxia stood before Zhou Xian with an emotionless expression as she gazed at the group that was charging towards her, and she held a spear in her hand. Her expression was extremely calm as she watched the gray-clothed man and the others charge over, and there wasn't even the slightest ripple in her eyes. The person in the lead was the gray-clothed man. He'd already gathered formidable force as he ran, and every single step he took caused the ground to instantly crack open. It was an extremely astounding sight. Right when the gray-clothed man was around 10 m away from Xianxia dashed forward swiftly with the spear in her hand. In the next moment, a spear had suddenly arrived in front of the gray-clothed man. The gray-clothed man's pupils constricted abruptly because the speed of Xianxia's spear had greatly exceeded his expectations. So he could only instinctively use his arms to block it. Bang! Under the gazes of countless people, the gray-clothed man instantly retreated explosively by 300 m. As soon as he stopped moving, he directly knelt on the ground, causing the ground to instantly explode apart. At the same time, the iron rings on his arms instantly transformed into a pile of fragments. Moreover, his arms had even been directly shattered into pieces and transformed into a pile of powder. The gray-clothed man was slightly stunned as he gazed at Xianxia, who stood in the distance. I'm actually unable to resist a single spear strike? Not far away, Xianxia didn't stop after she unleashed her spear. She pointed her spear diagonally at the ground, and in the next moment she swept her spear. At this moment the surrounding space actually became illusory. Space illusion. The nearby white-robed old man's expression changed drastically when he saw this scene, and he cried out involuntarily, "Spear Master! You actually reached the level of Spear Master." Not far away. Bang 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 bang. In an instant, countless figures retreated. This retreat was no less than 1,000 feet. Among them, the one-armed man's left arm had been directly swept off by the spear, and he was now an armless man. As he looked at Xianxia, his eyes were also filled with terror. Spear owner. In the distance, the middle-aged man looked at Xianxia with slight astonishment. Who exactly are you? At this moment he was beyond shocked. It wasn't that the Central Divine Continent didn't have spear masters, but it was the first time he'd seen such a young spear master. Xianxia glanced at the middle-aged man but didn't reply, and she instead retreated to a spot not too far away from Zhou Xian. She just stood there like that, like a god of war. On the other hand, no one dared to make a move. This was too terrifying. On the other side, the white-robed old man stared fixedly at Xianxia. Who exactly are you? Why are you interfering in the matters between my Kuraki Academy and the Dark World? If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Xianxia glanced at the white-robed old man. You're disgruntled? The white-robed old man's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you aware of the consequences? He naturally didn't dare to attack rashly. After all, he wouldn't believe that such a genius didn't have someone backing her. Xianxia walked over to the white-robed old man with her spear in hand, and then she looked him in the eyes. Do you want a one-on-one battle or a group battle? One-on-one battle or a group battle? The surroundings were deathly silent. On the other hand, the white-robed old man's expression instantly turned savage. This was simply going too far. How could he endure this? He was about to attack right away, but right at this moment, numerous formidable auras suddenly enveloped him. All of them were above the peak of the myriad techniques realm. The white-robed old man's expression changed once more when he noticed this scene. Meanwhile, an old man appeared by Xianxia's side. The old man wore black clothes and his hands were hidden within his sleeves. His gaze was sharp like an arrow, and he just stared fixedly at the white-robed old man while his eyes didn't carry a trace of emotion. The white-robed old man glanced at Xianxia and the black-clothed old man. Which power are both of you from? At this moment he was naturally shocked because it was utterly impossible for an ordinary power to foster such a genius, and it was impossible for an ordinary power to casually foster a few experts at the peak of the Dharma realm or above. The black-clothed old man glanced at the white-robed old man and said in a hoarse voice, "Fuck off right now." His voice was extremely unpleasant and slightly ear-piercing. The white-robed old man's face instantly turned livid and he was about to flare up. However, a voice suddenly entered his mind, and it didn't take long for his pupils to constrict. After that he took a deep and long glance at Xianxia. When he spoke up to hear, he didn't dare continue. After a short moment the white-robed old man turned around and left, and the army of 100,000 cavalry left with him. They retreated very swiftly. Xianxia. There was no one in the Central Divine Prefecture that didn't know this name, because this name was ranked at the 6th position on the Monstrous Genius rankings. Yet she'd merely used a single day to rise from the 30th position to the 6th position. The power that stood behind such a person was a mystery, and it was a mystery even to Kuraki Academy. That was the most terrifying part. After all, Kuraki Academy was a large power in the Central Divine Prefecture. While its information network couldn't be said to be the best in the Central Divine Prefecture, it was absolutely not bad. Moreover, even Kuraki Academy hadn't been able to find any information about Xianxia's origins. The white-robed old man didn't dare threaten her with a life-and-death struggle because he didn't dare to. If he did, then perhaps Xianxia would really fight Kuraki Academy to the death. Because she really wasn't afraid. So the white-robed old man retreated decisively. After the white-robed old man and the others retreated, Xianxia turned around. Meanwhile, Zhou Xian had suddenly put the spirit grace sword away, and then he arrived in front of her. Xianxia was slightly stunned. He was interrupted? The corners of Zhou Xian's mouth curled up slightly. I think so. Xianxia shook her head slightly. Be serious. Zhou Xian chuckled and then he spoke with a serious expression. And what are you doing here? Xianxia was stunned. Obviously, she'd never imagined that Zhou Xian would call her by her nickname because this nickname was something that only the 2 or 3 people closest to her could call her by. When the black-clothed old man heard Zhou Xian call Xianxia by her nickname, he immediately frowned, and his face instantly sank when he noticed that Xianxia wasn't angry. He just stared fixedly at Zhou Xian with an extremely gloomy expression. Xianxia sized him up. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. She glanced at Zhou Xian and said softly, "Come with me." Zhou Xian nodded. Just like that, the two of them walked away. The black-robed old man's face was dark the entire time. No one knew what he was thinking. At first, the two of them didn't say anything and just walked on. Finally, Zhou Xian broke the silence. "Zhang, why are you here?" And Xianxia lightly combed her hair behind her ear and said, "The matter of Kuraki Academy and the dark dimension targeting you has caused quite a stir in the Central Divine Prefecture." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "That's why you've come." And Xianxia stopped moving and then she turned around to look at Zhou Xian. "I didn't want to come." Zhou Xian was stunned. And Xianxia shook her head. "My arrival will bring trouble to you, and this trouble isn't any less than the trouble that Kuraki Academy and the Dark Dimension brought to you, and it might even be more." When she spoke up to hear, she walked slowly towards the distance and said, "Many troublesome matters will come successively when I meet you this time. You're unable to endure all of this now, and I don't want you to be swept into it as well. However, you have no choice but to be swept into it now." Zhou Xian said in a low voice, "Your clan?" And Xianxia nodded. "Besides mine, there are others." When she spoke up to hear, she turned around to look at Zhou Xian. "I'll leave immediately. After I leave, I'll do my best to restrain the members of my clan, but I can't restrain anyone else. Since you've chosen to become friends with me, you won't be able to avoid some troubles. Do you understand?" Zhou Xian nodded. "I understand." And Xianxia shook her head. "You don't understand. True great clans attach great importance to one's background and lineage, as well as bloodline and natural talent. All of this is very complicated. Zhou Xian smiled and said, "Do you want to break off all ties with me?" And Xianxia looked at Zhou Xian. "If I promise to my clan that I won't see you in the future, then Kuraki Academy and the Dark Dimension will vanish from this world tomorrow. On the other hand, if I choose to become friends with you, then your enemies won't just be Kuraki Academy and the Dark Dimension, there'll be someone even stronger than them." Zhou Xian fell silent. And Xianxia turned around and walked towards the black-robed old man, her expression very calm. Right at this moment, Zhou Xian's voice suddenly came from behind her. "I choose the latter." And Xianxia stopped her steps. Zhou Xian smiled and said, "Little An, I know that choosing the latter will cause me to face many things and I might even die. However, I don't regret it. I don't know what it means to like or love. I only know that meeting you in this lifetime is the happiest thing that has happened to me. For you, for the friendship between us, I'm willing to use my life to protect it." As he spoke up to hear, he walked behind Xianxia. "I'm not afraid of Kuraki Academy, I'm not afraid of your clan, and I'm not afraid of death. However, I'm truly afraid of becoming strangers with you from now on. I'm very afraid." And Xianxia was silent for a very long time. In the end, she said in a light voice, "You're really stupid." Finished speaking, she walked towards the distance. No one noticed that the corners of her mouth slightly rose into an undetectable arc. At the side, the black-robed old man glanced coldly at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian smiled faintly at the black-robed old man. "Actually, I'm not bad. Really, I'm already a grandmaster of the Sword Dao and a grandmaster of the Martial Dao. Although I'm only at the Nether Passage realm, killing divine fusion experts is like chopping vegetables. You won't be able to find a man more outstanding than me in Azure Province." As he spoke, he became incomparably serious. "Really, don't be prejudiced against me. Properly understand me. I believe that you'll accept me. I'm really outstanding." The black-robed old man. End of this chapter. Chapter 159. The old man in black looked coldly at Zhou Xian and didn't say a word. Zhou Xian said seriously, "It's true. I'm not trying to brag, but your family can get a deeper understanding of me. As long as you get to know me, you'll realize that I'm an extremely outstanding person." The old man in black suddenly said, "I'm not from the Yin family." Zhou Xian. The old man in black glanced at Zhou Xian and didn't conceal the killing intent in his eyes. "But don't worry, we'll get a deeper understanding of you." With that, he glanced coldly at Zhou Xian and turned to leave. Zhou Xian was stunned and shook his head. "That's AF * king enemy." At this moment, Xianxia walked to Zhou Xian's side. She looked at the distant horizon and said softly, "Has she left?" Zhou Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. and Lanxiu had already disappeared into the horizon. She really left. She didn't stop at all. Jiang Jiu said softly. She left in such a hurry. The matter might be very serious. Yi Xian nodded. I know. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian and there was a trace of worry in her eyes. And Lanxiu's family wasn't ordinary. If Yi Xian and Lanxiu were just ordinary friends, it might not be a big deal. But the problem was that Lanxiu's attitude towards Yi Xian was indeed not ordinary. For example, the way she called him Little N. She only knew that in the entire country of Jiang, only she could call Lanxiu Little N. In the past, her big brother, the country of Jiang's crown prince, had also called her that. At that time, Lanxiu didn't give the crown prince any face and directly pointed a spear at his face. Since then, besides her, no one else dared to call Lanxiu by her nickname. And just now Yi Xian had called her that. But Lanxiu didn't feel any disgust towards it. Actually, as long as one wasn't blind, one could see that Lanxiu's attitude towards Yi Xian wasn't ordinary. Was Yi Xian outstanding? He was definitely outstanding. However, in the eyes of these aristocratic families, this might not be enough. These aristocratic families had seen too many monstrous geniuses. Ordinary monstrous geniuses could not even enter their eyes. Moreover, to them, talent wasn't the only thing that mattered. Status and background were important as well. This was the so-called well-matched match in terms of social status. The rich and powerful clans attached great importance to this point. Yi Xian and Lanxiu were clearly of unequal social status. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Let's go." With that, he turned around and left. Jiang Jiu glanced at the end of the horizon, yet she couldn't see Lanxiu's figure any longer. After a short moment, she sighed lightly before turning around and leaving. Along with Lanxiu's appearance, the entire state of Jiang suddenly calmed down. Although the armies of the Chu country and the Yu country didn't completely retreat from the Jiang country's territory, they didn't launch another attack. They didn't dare to attack because they still didn't know what Lanxiu's intentions were. In short, Jianggu could finally take a breather. Mizar City was not big, only having a population of 500,000 to 600,000. However, with the arrival of the Chu Empire's army, the population of Mizar City had been reduced by at least half. They had all escaped. After Yi Xian returned to Mizar City, he walked along the streets alone. Thinking about many things. Actually, he'd already been interrupted outside the city. It hadn't been interrupted by external factors but by himself, because he noticed that when he sensed his surroundings such as the wind, he was actually unable to calm down. Impetuous. When he wanted to calmly feel the wind around him, he realized how impetuous he was. He'd walked all the way since leaving Azure City. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. Because I've truly been too impetuous. In this world there wasn't only fighting and killing, nor was there only cultivation. There were many other beautiful things and he'd been neglecting all of them. Now he just wanted to calm down and take a serious look at his surroundings. He wanted to seriously feel the wind, the streets and everything in his surroundings. As he walked, he'd unknowingly arrived by a river. There were rows of small houses on both sides of the river. At this moment there was no one in those houses. The houses on both sides of the street were empty. They'd fled. Once the war started, these ordinary people were simply as weak as a piece of paper in front of war. In Azure Province, the strong were respected, but not everyone could learn martial arts. Therefore there were more ordinary people. Ordinary people who had never learned martial arts had no ability to resist in the face of war. And to those top forces, wasn't he also an ordinary person? At this moment, a little girl suddenly ran in front of him. The little girl was about 5 or 6 years old and she was wearing an old tattered dress. The dress was really tattered and there were small holes everywhere. There were 2 large scars on her knees, and the blood had already coagulated. The little girl was wearing a pair of worn-out straw sandals. The soles of the straw sandals had already been worn out, so the little girl's 5 toes were curled inward. This was because when she stretched them out, her toes would come into intimate contact with the ground. The little girl raised her head and looked at Yi Xian. Her eyes were very watery as she said in a clear voice, "Brother Yi, thank you for saving us just now." Yi Xian was stunned. He turned his head. Not far away there were several people, both men and women. Clearly, these people were the little girl's relatives. At this moment, a middle-aged man hurriedly walked in front of Yi Xian. He knelt down and kowtowed heavily. We are the people who were chased by the Chu army outside the city. If State Scholar Yi had not appeared, we would have died outside the city. Thank you, State Scholar Yi, for saving our lives. Not far away, the few people also knelt down. The little girl in front of Yi Xian also wanted to learn from the adults and kneel down, but she was carried by Yi Xian. The middle-aged man's expression changed greatly. Tong Tong, come down quickly. Don't dirty State Scholar Yi's clothes. The little girl was about to break free from Yi Xian, but Yi Xian smiled and said, Don't move. Let me carry you. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. Hey, dirty. Yi Xian gently kissed the little girl's cheek. He smiled and said, Not dirty at all. The little girl blinked. Then she gently kissed Yi Xian. Yi Xian laughed. He faced the middle-aged man and said, Get up. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and then stood up. But his body was still half bowed. This was not fear but respect. Respect from the bottom of their hearts. Yi Xian asked, Do you have a place to go? The middle-aged man shook his head. I didn't know where to go before. Now I want to go to the imperial capital because it might be safer there. Safer. Yi Xian was silent. After a moment he said softly, The journey to the imperial capital is long. You don't have the ability to protect yourselves. It's too dangerous. How about staying in the city? The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. The army outside the city. Yi Xian smiled and said, I promise you that this city will not be breached by the army of Chu. You can stay in the city without worry. How about it? The middle-aged man and the others looked at each other. Then they all knelt down. The middle-aged man bowed deeply. We believe in State Scholar Yi. Yi Xian said softly, Get up. The middle-aged man and the others got up. Yi Xian placed the little girl in his arms on the ground. He gently rubbed the little girl's head. This chapter is not finished. Please continue. The child smiled and said, You are called Tong Tong? The little girl quickly nodded. Big brother, is it nice? Yi Xian smiled and said, Nice. Very nice. He opened his right hand. 2 scrolls appeared in his hand. Then he pointed with his finger. The 2 scrolls turned into a white light and disappeared into the little girl's forehead. Cultivation method and martial skill inheritance. The little girl was stunned for a long time. Finally, she looked at Yi Xian and said in a crisp voice, Big brother. What is this? Yi Xian said softly, You can cultivate according to the method in your head. You have to cultivate slowly. In the future you can be as powerful as Big brother. The little girl blinked. Really? Yi Xian smiled and said, Really? However, you can't tell others about this. Just treat it as a little secret between you and Big brother, okay? The little girl quickly nodded. Yi Xian opened his right palm. A money bag appeared in his hand. He threw the money bag to the middle-aged man. Live well in the city. Treat Tong Tong well. Give her 2 sets of good clothes and shoes. I like this little girl very much. In the future I will come to Kaiyang City to see her. The middle-aged man quickly said, Okay. Then he and the others bowed deeply to Yi Xian. Then they pulled Tong Tong and left. Not long after, Tong Tong suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Big brother, will you come to find me? Yi Xian smiled and said, Yes. Tong Tong smiled sweetly. I will wait for Big brother to come. Then she turned and left with the middle-aged man and others. Watching the little girl leave, Yi Xian smiled slightly. He turned to face the river in front of him. Suddenly he found that his one thought might be able to determine the life and death of many people. If it was an evil thought, many people might die. If it was a good thought, it might be able to change a person's life or even the lives of countless people. Thinking of this, boom, a sword intent suddenly swept out of his body. This sword intent scattered towards the small river. The surface of the small river in front of Yi Xian suddenly surged with waves. But gradually, a strange phenomenon appeared on the river surface. The left side of the river, which was covered by the sword intent, was like boiling water. But the right side, which was covered by the sword intent, was extremely calm with only slight ripples. One side of the river, one kind of sword intent. There were 2 extremes. Just like this, after an unknown period of time, the sword intent on the river surface suddenly surged back into Yi Xian's body like a tide. But the next moment the sword intent swept out of his body again. The sword intent followed the surface of the small river and vibrated into the distance. On the entire surface of the small river, the water on the left side was violently boiling, while the right side, which was covered by the sword intent, was extremely calm. After a few breaths, the sword intent suddenly disappeared. On the shore, Yi Xian's lips curled up. So that's how it is. One good thought, thousands of mountains and rivers. One evil thought, the world will change. Good and evil. Good and evil sword intent. Good and evil sword Dao. If I do good, thousands of mountains and rivers. If I do evil, the world will change. When Yi Xian's mind was clear in his body at the top of the world prison pagoda, one of the three swords suddenly trembled. P.S. Let me recommend another book. Open a clinic to cultivate. It's also published by Vertical and Horizontal in the city. It's very worth reading. Everyone should go read it. Finally, some people said that our Sword Supreme's book comment section is dead. There's not a single living person. Brothers, stop lurking. Come out and leave a comment like, Boss Egg is the most handsome, to prove that you all still exist. It also proves that there are still people reading my book and it's not a standalone game. End of this chapter. Chapter 160. At the top of the prison pagoda, the sword trembled for a moment before returning to normal. However, Yi Xian did not realize it. Outside the pagoda, Yi Xian spread his arms and greedily absorbed the fresh air around him. At this moment he felt extremely relaxed. This relaxation was not only in his heart but also in his mind. Previously, his understanding of his sword principle was somewhat vague. This vagueness meant that he did not have a clear understanding of his sword principle. Not to mention his sword principle, he did not even have a concept of sword intent. But now everything was clear. It felt like the clouds had parted and he could see the clear sky. Good and evil. One thought could be good and the other could be evil. Actually, previously his sword intent was not considered good and evil sword intent. It was only the embryonic form of good and evil sword intent. However, the moment his mind was clear, his sword intent was considered to have reached the level of good and evil sword intent. Yi Xian realized that his sword intent was much stronger than before. If he were to encounter the man in gray who had fought with him previously, he was confident that he could kill him within 5 moves. And this was under the situation where he did not have to decide life and death with one strike. Was sword intent divided into realms? Yi Xian had some doubts in his mind, but unfortunately he did not get an answer. This was because Sister Sword Celestial was still in a deep sleep. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian walked along the river. He extended his right hand to the right with his palm facing outwards. A light breeze brushed past and he felt a chill in his palm. Sensation. Just like when he was cultivating the sword eye, he could sense everything around him. However, this time he was not just sensing, he was also borrowing. When he was fighting with the gray-clothed man, he fused his battle will and sword intent into his sword force. At that moment, an idea popped into his mind. Since battle will and sword intent could be fused into his force, why couldn't other things do the same? For example, the wind or the earth. Yi Xian stepped on the ground. This time he did not activate the Dao Law because the Dao Law belonged to someone else. It was ready-made and did not belong to him. Just like that, Duan Ling Tian's body emitted a strand of force as he walked. Sword momentum. Gradually, countless battle will and sword will melded into his force, and the wind that passed through his palm suddenly stopped and then gathered into his force. Not only that, but the ground under his feet suddenly trembled. Very soon, the power of the earth flowed from his feet to his body, and finally gathered into his force like a tide. At this moment, the aura emanating from his body was even more terrifying. On the surface of the river on his right, the water was boiling. At the same time, with every step he took, the ground in front of him would crumble. Force. Take advantage of the situation. At this moment, Yi Xian was very excited because he realized that he could really borrow power. Not only could it be borrowed, but it could also be fused. He fused all of this into his force. For example, battle intent, sword intent. When all of these were integrated into his sword force, it was no longer just a sword force. The momentum had already transformed. More accurately, it was no longer just a person's momentum. A person's momentum was still limited to him. It was like a cup of water. The capacity of the cup was limited, but if this cup was placed into a basin and broken, the water would increase. This force was like water. If he wanted to store more, he had to break through his own shackles. Yi Xian walked forward slowly. gradually on his right. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. A powerful force appeared in the river. Water force. The water force gathered towards him bit by bit. Bang. The ground under Yi Xian's feet was no longer collapsing but completely shattered. The force that gathered on his body was so strong that the ground under his feet could no longer bear it. It was unstoppable. Together with his good and evil sword will, he could easily kill a Nether Passage realm expert with this force. If he fought against the man in gray again, he was confident that he could kill him in 3 strikes. If he used life and death with one sword, he could do it with 1 strike. A person's strength could not be measured by their realm. Concept, momentum, combat experience, and equipment. None of these could be lacking. At this moment, other than his realm, he had reached his peak in all other aspects. If he reached the Divine Unity realm, his strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. Yi Xian suddenly stopped and pressed his right hand down. Disperse. As he spoke, the force that gathered on his body disappeared without a trace. The river regained its calm. Sword Master. Yi Xian's lips curled up slightly. He should be considered a sword master now. As if he thought of something, he pointed his finger forward and a ray of sword light flashed. 300 feet away, a tree branch fell with a crack. Just as it was about to hit the ground, the Spirit Elegance sword suddenly appeared. The tree branch landed firmly on the Spirit Elegance sword. The next moment, with a flash of sword light, the Spirit Elegance sword appeared in front of him. The smile on Yi Xian's face gradually widened. Compared to before, his current Imperial sword technique had undergone a qualitative transformation, be it in terms of speed or strength. Most importantly, he was now able to control the sword with ease. It was not stiff at all. It was as if the sword was part of his hand. At this moment, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian. The 5th floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Yi Xian tapped his right foot lightly and activated the Tao Law. The aura on his body was instantly concealed by the Tao Law. To be precise, he was using the power of the earth to conceal himself. A long time ago he had already discovered that this Tao Law could conceal his aura and realm. However, there was no need for him to conceal himself previously. But now he didn't want to reveal his true strength. He wanted to keep a trump card as it would have an unexpected effect. The 5th floor master walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled bitterly. Little friend, clasp your fist. My Drunken Immortal Inn has chosen to withdraw from this matter. Yi Xian's expression was calm as he nodded slightly. I have expected it. The 5th floor master shook his head. Apologies. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, please don't say that. I am already greatly indebted to the Drunken Immortal Inn. As he spoke, he said seriously, it is a favor for the Drunken Immortal Inn to help me. Even if you don't help me, it is also your duty. Moreover, during this period of time, the Drunken Immortal Inn has helped me several times when I was in danger. I, Yi Xian, will never forget this favor. If the Drunken Immortal Inn needs anything in the future, I, Yi Xian, will not shirk my duty. The 5th floor master had a complicated look in his eyes. If he helped Yi Xian in the beginning because he wanted to rope in the sword immortal behind Yi Xian, then now he really admired Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian was impulsive at times, he was a very loyal person. Back then, Kuraki Academy not accepting Yi Xian was definitely the stupidest decision in 100 years. If such a genius was accepted, as long as you treated him well, he would use his life to repay you. Just like Old Man Ji, Azure Billow Academy. The 5th floor master shook his head and sighed. He spread his hands and a long box appeared in his hands. He handed the box to Yi Xian. Young friend, this is what you need. Yi Xian opened the box. Inside the box there were 2 swords. 2 swords that looked exactly the same. The swords were longer, about 5 feet long. If this chapter is not finished, please continue. The swords were very narrow, less than a finger's length. Thin swords. The 5th floor master said softly, these 2 swords are called Jiaying. They are not ordinary swords but flying swords. They are custom-made for sword immortals who mainly use sword kinesis. If young friend can use sword kinesis with this sword, your power will increase by at least 2 times. My Drunken Immortal Inn has already erased swordsman's imprint. Young friend, you can use it at any time. King. Yi Xian faced the box, and with a flick of his right hand's fingers, the 2 swords flew out of the box. Yi Xian pointed his fingers forward. In an instant, the 2 swords appeared behind 2 trees 500 feet away. The next moment, the 2 swords returned to Yi Xian. 500 feet away at the top of the two trees, two leaves fell slowly. Seeing this scene, the fifth floor master was a little shocked. He knew that Zhou Xian knew how to ride a sword, but he never imagined that the speed of Zhou Xian's sword would be this fast. It was so fast that even he was a little shocked. This was not a speed that a nether passage realm cultivator could achieve. In front of the fifth floor master, Zhou Xian gently stroked the two swords. He exclaimed, Jiang, what a good sword. The two swords seemed to sense something. They trembled slightly and let out a soft sword hum. Zhou Xian laughed and put away the two swords. Then he cupped his fists at the fifth floor master. Senior, thank you. After saying this, he took out a gold card. At this moment, the fifth floor master suddenly shook his head. No need. This sword is a gift from my drunken immortal inn. Zhou Xian shook his head and said seriously, friendship is friendship, business is business. After saying this, he took out a gold card and placed it in front of the fifth floor master. Seeing that the fifth floor master did not accept it, he said seriously, if senior does not accept it, I will not trouble the drunken immortal inn anymore. Hearing this, the fifth floor master smiled bitterly and put away the two gold cards. In the gold cards there were 200 million gold coins. Zhou Xian smiled. Senior, if it is possible, I may have to trouble your inn for information in the future. Apart from that, if I want to sell anything, I may have to look for you. The fifth floor master said seriously, the higher-ups have already instructed that as long as it is within the scope of the drunken immortal inn's ability, the drunken immortal inn will do its best to help you. However, this expert, Zhou Xian smiled. It is enough. Senior, we will meet again. After saying this, he turned and left. The fifth floor master glanced at Zhou Xian and said softly, if he does not fall, he will definitely become a sword immortal in the future. After saying this, he turned and disappeared on the spot. Zhou Xian came to the city wall of Mizar City. Along the way, countless soldiers saluted and looked at Zhou Xian with excitement. Swordsman. The swordsman of Jiang country. This was the honor of Jiang country. Zhou Xian came to Jiang Jiu's side. Jiang Jiu looked at the end of the city wall and said softly, they have not retreated yet. Zhou Xian looked into the distance. At the end of his sight he could still see a dense army. Chu country's cavalry. At this moment a group of cavalry suddenly came from afar. There were not many of them, only about 20 people. From their clothes they were not Chu country's soldiers. Beside Zhou Xian, Jiang Jiu said in a deep voice, Great Cloud Country's soldiers. Great Cloud Country finally appeared. Zhou Xian faced the city wall. At this moment the 20 people had already reached the city wall. The middle-aged man in the lead raised his head and looked at Zhou Xian and Jiang Jiu. Surrender. Or die. At this moment, a sword suddenly pointed at the middle-aged man's forehead. On the city wall, Zhou Xian faced down. The wind is too strong. I did not hear you clearly. Please say it again. Everyone, end of this chapter. Chapter 161. The battlefield suddenly quietened down. Below the city, the 20 or so cavalrymen stared at Zhou Xian, especially the middle-aged man who was leading them. Although a sword was pressed against his forehead, there was no fear in his eyes. If you don't surrender, the day the army enters the city will be the day you will be beheaded. Zhou Xian gave the middle-aged man a thumbs up. You've got guts. The middle-aged man sneered. Kill me? You won't dare even if you have 100 guts. Zhou Xian was puzzled. Why? The middle-aged man pointed at himself. I'm a soldier of Great Cloud Empire. I'm here on behalf of Great Cloud Empire. If you kill me, Great Cloud Empire. The elegant spirit sword suddenly pierced through the middle-aged man's forehead. The middle-aged man's voice stopped abruptly. His eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. On the city wall, Zhou Xian opened his palm and the elegant spirit sword flew into his hand. A drop of blood slowly dripped from the tip of the sword. Zhou Xian looked at the middle-aged man and shook his head. How dare you threaten me like this? Don't I have any face? The middle-aged man was speechless. A few breaths later, the middle-aged man fell from his horse, but his eyes were wide open. He died with everlasting regret. The rest of the Great Cloud Empire soldiers were enraged when they saw the middle-aged man was killed. One of them pointed at Zhou Xian and said angrily, How dare you kill our Great Cloud Empire, Qi? Without any warning, A sword suddenly pierced through the soldier's throat. The soldier fell to the ground from his horse. Blood spurted out of his throat. Staring at Zhou Xian, he held his throat with both hands. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not stop the blood from spurting out. Zhou Xian turned to the rest of the soldiers. "Do you have anything to say about their fate?" At this moment the soldiers were horrified. At the same time, they realized that this guy wasn't afraid of Great Cloud Empire at all. "Run." Without any hesitation, the remaining dozen cavalrymen turned and fled. Zhang Jiu suddenly asked beside Zhou Xian, "Why didn't you kill them all?" Zhou Xian smiled and turned to face the soldiers on the wall. "Do you see that? This was the power of Great Cloud Empire. The soldiers of Great Cloud Empire weren't invincible. They could still be killed and cowered. So, why should the men of Jiang be afraid of the Great Cloud Empire? If one comes, we'll kill one. Even if we die, we'll take one down with us." On the city wall, the soldiers who had solemn expressions suddenly became excited. Countless soldiers roared in unison, "Kill whoever comes. I'll kill whoever comes." His voice was like thunder resounding through the clouds. Sensing this scene, Zhou Xian smiled. Morale. The small countries in Qing province were actually in awe of Great Cloud Empire because it was the largest empire in Qing province. In fact, Great Cloud Empire had once annihilated a country with a team of 100 cavalrymen. Therefore these soldiers were very fearful of Great Cloud Empire. If they did not raise the morale of these soldiers, the state of Jiang would have been defeated before the battle even started. Zhang Jiu glanced at Zhou Xian with an undetectable curve on the corner of her mouth. Zhou Xian suddenly said, "I'm going back to Azure Waves Academy." Zhang Jiu asked, "When will you be back?" Zhou Xian answered, "Soon." Zhang Jiu sighed. "If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. I'll wait for you." Zhou Xian nodded. Because of Shaoan Chu Karaki Academy and Dark World won't make a move for a while. But be careful. I'll be back in 2 days at the latest. Finishing his words, he turned and left. Zhang Jiu looked at Zhou Xian's back until Zhou Xian disappeared at the end of the horizon. Zhou Xian didn't ride the cloud ship. Instead he rode the Black Wolf that Lu Banzwang left for him. Because the speed of the Black Wolf had surpassed the cloud ship, it would take him at most half a day to return to Azure Waves Academy from Mizar City. He had to make a trip back to Azure Waves Academy because it was impossible to resist Chu's army with the military strength of Two Realm City, especially when Great Cloud Empire was involved. He had to find reinforcements. As for the 2 Jiang swords, he didn't devour them because he found it hard to reach Spirit Unite Realm with 2 bright grade swords given his current realm. He needed at least 5 swords. Under such circumstances, it was better to keep the 2 swords. Now that he had the 2 swords, his combat strength would rise to a new level. 100 miles away from Mizar City was the encampment of Chu's army. Inside a tent. Impudent. A bellow suddenly sounded. Inside the tent, a middle-aged man clad in iron armor glared at a soldier kneeling on the ground in front of him. His eyes were filled with malevolence. "Does Jiang country really humiliate my Great Cloud Empire?" The soldier lowered his head, replying to General what this subordinate said was true. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. "Pass down my order. Great Cloud Cavalry assemble." At this moment, a white-robed elder and a black shadow suddenly appeared in the tent. The white-robed elder glanced at the soldier kneeling on the ground. "Stand down." The soldier hurriedly retreated. The white-robed elder looked at the middle-aged man. "General Li Feng, did King Kaoshan tell you to listen to my orders?" The middle-aged man named Li Feng's expression was rather unsightly. The white-robed elder said indifferently, "General Li, that Zhou Xian even dared to slaughter my Kuraki Academy. Do you think he's afraid of your Great Cloud Empire? Not only is he extremely talented, but he also has a sword immortal backing him. Moreover, Xianxia suddenly came back to help him. Before we figure out Nguisher's intention, you're not allowed to organize anything. Otherwise you'll be punished according to the military order." Li Feng clenched his fists and his face was livid, but he still nodded. The white-robed elder's expression was also somewhat unsightly. Because of Xianxia, they were now in a deadlock here. The reason why they didn't dare to make a move was that they hadn't found out Xianxia's identity and background. Most importantly, they were afraid that the force behind Xianxia would also join in. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Country and Dark World didn't dare to act rashly. But if they didn't make a move, he was afraid. He was afraid of giving Yi Xian more time to grow. Previously at Mizar City, Yi Xian had almost taken advantage of the situation to become a sword master. At that moment he was really terrified. Because once Yi Xian became a sword master, it meant that Kuraki Academy and Dark World wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Because the geniuses they could invite were at most those who were below the top 20 on the demon-level geniuses list. If they went any higher, the price would be too great. And if Yi Xian became a sword master, then they would have to invite the top 10 geniuses on the demon-level geniuses list to have a chance of killing Yi Xian. As for the top 10 geniuses, Kuraki Academy wouldn't be able to come into contact with them. Moreover, these geniuses wouldn't lack money because they were already on another level. So, once Yi Xian became a sword master, under the situation that the Myriad Laws realm didn't appear, this chapter isn't over, please continue to the next page. At that time, the situation between Kuraki Academy and Dark World would become very, very bad. Fortunately, Yi Xian had failed. Outside the city, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Yi Xian hadn't succeeded in taking advantage of the situation. So long as Yi Xian hadn't attained the Swordmaster realm, then they were still able to kill Yi Xian without paying too great of a price. But now Xianxia had appeared. When he thought of Xianxia, the white-robed old man's face instantly sank. She really is an extraordinary genius. The problem was why Yi Xian knew such a genius? The nearby mistress of the Dark World suddenly said, "Brother Li Mu, do we need to invite those Dao protectors?" "Dao protectors?" The white-robed old man called Li Mu said in a low voice. "If we invite them, then we'll probably have to pay a great price." The mistress of the Dark World said, "Only they would be able to find out exactly who that woman is." Li Mu fell silent. Right at this moment, a black-clothed old man suddenly appeared here. Li Mu's eyes instantly narrowed slightly when he saw this black-clothed old man, and he was slightly vigilant. Because this person was precisely the person that followed by Xianxia's side that day. The black-clothed old man glanced at the nearby mistress of the Dark World who'd concealed herself. "Don't make a fool of yourself with this inferior concealment technique of yours." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot on the ground. Bang! A muffled bang resounded from the corner of a wall that was over 10 m away, and then a middle-aged man that wore a black robe appeared within everyone's field of vision. He'd revealed his true form with a single strike. The mistress of the Dark World looked at the black-clothed old man with dense fear in her eyes. The black-clothed old man looked at the white-robed old man. "I know what all of you are worried about. Don't worry, we won't interfere in the matter between all of you and Yi Xian." Li Mu frowned slightly. "Why?" A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of the black-clothed old man's mouth. "Because we want him dead as well. However, because of young Missin we can't make a move. No matter if it's in the open or in the dark, we can't make a move. Of course she can't make a move as well." Li Mu said in a low voice, "Who exactly are you?" The black-clothed old man said indifferently, "This has nothing to do with all of you. I've only come to tell all of you that you can deal with that Yi Xian as you please. This person is only in the Nether Passage realm. Even though he's a Grand Master of the Way of the Sword, he shouldn't be much to your Kuraki Academy and the Dark World." As he spoke, he stood up. "I'll give you a suggestion. If you want to make a move again, it's best to gather all of your strength and kill him in one strike. Don't go one by one for him to practice on." Li Mu glanced at the black-clothed old man. "This person isn't as simple as you think." The black-clothed old man snorted coldly. "If it wasn't for young Missin, killing him would be as easy as snapping a finger. What all of you did earlier was truly foolish to the extreme. If you gather all of your strength, wouldn't it be a simple matter to kill him?" As he spoke, he turned to leave. However, he quickly stopped. "There's already someone rushing over from the Central Divine Prefecture. He'll be here soon. When the time comes, he'll assist all of you. At that time, I hope that all of you will use all of your strength and use all of your trump cards to kill this person in one strike." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure trembled and vanished. Within the tent, Li Mu and the mistress of the Dark World exchanged a glance. A moment later, Li Mu said in a low voice, "The mistress of the Dark World, immediately summon the Dao soldiers of the Dark World. General Li, immediately summon the Great Cloud Cavalry. Tell them to be ready at any time. Once Yi Xian dies, immediately break into the city and let the state of Jiang accompany him in death. As he spoke, he slowly closed his eyes. This time we'll succeed or die trying. End of this chapter. Chapter 162. Songlan Academy. At the foot of Mount Jiunshan, Yi Xian was stunned by the scene in front of him. At this moment, there were many people gathered at the foot of Mount Jiunshan. They were all looking up at Mount Jiunshan with eyes filled with anticipation. Yi Xian walked to a man's side. "Brother, what are you waiting for?" The man glanced at Yi Xian. "You don't know." Yi Xian shook his head. "Please tell me." The man said, "State scholar Yi Xian is coming back." Yi Xian was speechless. The man was excited. "It is said that he will return to Songlan Academy today. Therefore we are all waiting here. I am already waiting here at daybreak." Yi Xian was stunned for a while before he said, "Everyone here is waiting for him?" The man nodded. "Yes, some of the people in front are even crazier. They came before daybreak." Yi Xian asked again, "How do you know he will return today?" The man smiled. "It's spread throughout the capital." Yi Xian shook his head. It was probably Jiang Jiao who informed the king of Jiang and then spread the news. This was nothing, a small matter. Yi Xian patted the man's shoulder. "Yi Xian is just an ordinary person. There's nothing to see. Go back and have a good life. T. The man suddenly flew into a rage. How can state scholar Yi be an ordinary person? He is a state scholar of Jiang, a swordsman of Jiang. How dare you insult him? With that he threw a punch at Yi Xian. Insult him? Yi Xian was stunned. What did he say? Sensing the man's punch, Yi Xian lightly tapped the tip of his foot and retreated a few feet. The man's punch missed and he was instantly stunned. At this moment some people in the surroundings were already looking in their direction. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, a masked teenager suddenly pointed at Yi Xian angrily. I heard him insult state scholar Yi. Yi Xian was speechless. Some people instantly looked at Yi Xian when they heard the young man, and their eyes burned with rage. Yi Xian. In the hearts of the people of the state of Jiang, this name could not be said to be sacred, but it was definitely not to be offended. What Yi Xian had done in the Tang kingdom had already spread throughout the entire Jiang kingdom. His current fame was far greater than in Lan Xiu's. That was not the main point. The main point was that Yi Xian was defending the state of Jiang, fighting to protect the state of Jiang. He was a kingdom knight of Jiang country. He was also the swordsman of the kingdom of Jiang. A man suddenly walked up to Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian and asked in confusion, "Why do you look so familiar?" Yi Xian was speechless. Familiar? How could he not be familiar? Aren't you waiting for me? Actually, it was normal that these people didn't know him because he wasn't so famous when he was in the state of Jiang. Therefore many people had never seen him before. Even if they had seen him before, they had only seen him once from afar. It was just a brief encounter. Naturally, Yi Xian did not want the misunderstanding to continue. He was about to explain when the man who had attacked him earlier suddenly said, "This guy looks shifty-eyed. I can tell he's not a good person at first glance. Why don't we beat him up first?" Yi Xian's face darkened. Shifty eyes? Fuck, I don't even have eyes. Even if you want to beat me up, can't you find another reason? At this moment an exclamation suddenly resounded. It's Yi Exin. In next to no time the crowd parted and a woman walked over from afar. She was young, petite and wore a dark green dress. There was a small braid on the back of her head. As she walked through the crowd, the braid swayed gently and she looked extremely cute. Yexing. She was now a little famous in Songlan Academy and the imperial capital because of her achievements in various aspects. Most importantly, she was the youngest among all the students in Songlan Academy. Hence, she was the most doted upon in the academy. Yi Exin glanced at the people in front of her. Why are you making a ruckus here? At this moment, the man who wanted to beat Yi Xian hurriedly said, Miss Yi, someone is insulting state scholar Yi. Hearing this, Yi Exin's face immediately turned cold. Who? The man pointed at Yi Xian who was not far away, and the crowd hurriedly moved aside. When Yi Exin followed the man's finger and saw Yi Xian, she was immediately stunned on the spot. Yi Xian walked in front of Yi Exin and smiled. What's wrong? Don't you recognize me? Yi Exin came back to her senses. She clenched her dress tightly and said nervously, Ting. Dean, Dean. When they heard these two words, the crowd instantly quieted down. At the side, the young man who wanted to beat Zhou Xian directly sat on the ground. He was somewhat at a loss. Who am I? What did I do? Everyone, Zhou Xian looked around and smiled. Thanks to everyone's kindness, I waited here. Now that everyone has seen me, I'm just an ordinary person. There's nothing special about me. Everyone can disperse. After saying that, he turned to Yi Exin. Return to the courtyard. Yi Exin hurriedly nodded and then obediently stood behind Zhou Xian. Soon Zhou Xian and Yi Exin disappeared from everyone's sight. At the side, the young man sitting on the ground was still at a loss. I actually wanted to beat him just now. In front of Songlan Palace, Zhou Xian stopped in his tracks. Not far in front of him was Jianji. Jianji walked in front of Zhou Xian and said softly, "You're back." Zhou Xian nodded. Is everything okay? Jianji nodded slightly. Yes. Zhou Xian said, "Gather all the students." Jianji glanced at Zhou Xian and then turned to leave. In less than 15 minutes, all the students gathered in front of Kanglin Hall. Looking at Zhou Xian on the stage, the eyes of the students were filled with excitement and admiration. Kanglin Academy's current status in Jiang country was very high. The people of Jiang country respected Kanglin Academy from the bottom of their hearts. Now, everyone in Jiang country was truly proud to be a student of Kanglin Academy. And all of this was because of Zhou Xian. On the left and right of Zhou Xian were Jianji and Baizhe. Zhou Xian took a step forward and glanced below him. There was a total of 42 students here. Amongst them 21 were at the Skyfall realm, 9 were at the Nether Passage realm, and the rest were at the Qi-controlling realm. Zhou Xian pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "All of you should be aware that the armies of Chu Yu and Great Cloud Empires have arrived. There are 100,000 Chu cavalry outside Mizar City, and there are even Great Cloud Empires amongst them. If Mizar City is breached, then the Chu cavalry will be unobstructed and they'll march all the way south. Countless people of Jiang country will die at their hands." When he spoke up to this point, his voice gradually grew louder. "I've returned this time to ask all of you if all of you are willing to head to Mizar City with me and pledge your life to defend Jiang country? Join the army?" The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Zhou Xian would ask them to join the army. Zhou Xian spoke softly. "If the city is breached, then the Jiang country will perish. How could my Kanglin Academy be spared? Of course, I won't force all of you if you're unwilling." Meanwhile, Yi Exin suddenly stood forward. "I'm willing to head to Mizar City." As soon as Yi Exin stood forward, more and more people stood forward as well. Zhou Xian felt slightly gratified when he noticed that all of them were willing to head to Mizar City, and he spoke softly. "Do all of you know that most of you might not be able to return from this trip to Mizar City?" A man who stood before Zhou Xian grinned. "Dean, you've been fighting for Mizar City all this while. How could we be afraid of death when our Jiang country is fighting with our lives on the line? We want to fight by the side of the Dean and we can't bring shame to the Dean." "Right. We're willing to live and die with the Dean." "I don't agree." Right at this moment, a cold shout suddenly resounded from the side. Zhou Xian turned his head to look. Not far away, 2 people were walking over quickly. He naturally knew these 2 people. They were the 2 scholars he had invited, Mo Yuan and Feng Lan. Mo Yuan quickly walked in front of Zhou Xian and looked straight at Zhou Xian. "Have you ever thought that although these students' cultivation levels aren't low, they lack actual combat experience? If you bring them to the battlefield, many of them will die." Zhou Xian calmly replied, "It's precisely because they lack actual combat experience that we need more." Mo Yuan said in a deep voice, "You're spoiling the seedlings through excessive enthusiasm. Do you know that if you bring them to the battlefield, these geniuses that you've painstakingly nurtured might all die? All your painstaking efforts and old man Ji's last wish will go up in smoke." Zhou Xian shook his head and interrupted Mo Yuan. "If the country perishes, how can the students of Kanglin Academy be safe? We are students of Kanglin Academy, but we are also citizens of Jiang country. We are not superior to others. We have the same responsibility to protect this country." Mo Yuan looked at Zhou Xian and didn't say anything. Zhou Xian continued, "I don't want my students to be a flock of captive sheep. They must go out and experience the cruelty of war. For them, this is also a kind of cultivation. Otherwise, if Kanglin Academy is in danger one day, they won't even have the strength to fight. After seeing Ling Han, Lu Kuang, and the other geniuses of the Divine Central Continent, he understood one thing. If they only cultivated at home and didn't go out to explore, they would be trash for the rest of their lives. Ling Han and the members of the 9th Mercenary Troop, did they cultivate? No. They had fought their way out. They experienced countless battles of life and death to reach the strength they had today. If the students of Kanglin Academy didn't go out and fight, they would never be able to compare to the geniuses and monsters of the Divine Central Continent. A piece of iron would never become a sharp sword if it wasn't tempered thousands of times. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian for a long time. Gradually, his expression softened. Follow me. Yi Xian was a little puzzled because he realized that Mo Yuan and Feng Lan were a little mysterious. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian followed. The three of them arrived at the back of the mountain. Mo Yuan stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. He opened his palm and a box appeared in his hand. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. What's this? Mo Yuan opened the box. Inside the box were 12 little golden men, each holding a golden spear in their hands. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian. The 12 golden men were once forged by an extremely talented emperor who gathered all the pure gold from the 9 prefectures in the world. Each golden man hides a formation within. Once spirit energy is injected into the formation and activated, the golden men can suppress the 9 prefectures. However, they were once heavily injured and their spirituality is damaged. Now they are only equivalent to divine unity tier cultivators. Moreover, because the formation has been damaged, activating it requires many supreme-grade spirit tools. Yi Xian solemnly asked, "How's the power?" Mo Yuan gently flicked his right hand. One of the golden men in the box suddenly turned into a golden light and landed to the side. At this moment, the small golden man had turned into a big golden man that was much bigger than Yi Xian. Mo Yuan indifferently said, "Give it a try." Yi Xian flicked his finger and a sword ray suddenly struck the golden man. The golden man didn't move. The sword didn't even leave a mark on it. Yi Xian's face changed. His sword was a real sword. A moment later, Yi Xian turned to Mo Yuan. Conditions. Mo Yuan looked straight at Yi Xian. Join my Confucian Dao and become the representative of my Confucian Dao. If you're willing, my Confucian Dao will support you. P.S. I might be on leave because I'm going to Guangzhou. I have activities every day, so I don't have any time to write. I can't take it anymore. His schedule for the day was too full. Sorry. Genius 1 Second Remember website. Mobile version. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.